with a couple of topics here in the first hour. The first one, trickle-down economics. This, and I also want to get into how deregulation is harming condominium owners and condo owners and you know, all across the country. And these right-wingers who are outraged about Gwen Berry. So we'll get to all those things here in the first hour. But my rant for today, in you know, over at Hartmann Report, is specifically, you know, I mean, the headline says trickle-down economics isn't even a new con, and you know that this is there's this new study out. It came out a few months ago, but you know, it's new to me, and from the London School of Economics, that found that the Reagan-Bush tax cuts, which have added about $18 trillion to our budget deficit, not only haven't caused, quote, job creators to create more jobs, but they wiped us out. I mean, it just literally wiped us out economically and politically, and they're gutting the middle class. Robert Reich, however he says his name, Reich, yeah, there you go. The English pronunciation. Anyhow, he says, over at his blog, he says, since the start of the pandemic, now, you know, that's like 14 months ago, right? Maybe 16 months ago now. Since the start of the pandemic, just 651 American billionaires have gained $1 trillion in wealth. That's enough to have for those 651 billionaires to mail a check to every American for $3,000. Put another way, that means that $3,000 came out of the pocket of every American. And I'm not talking every family. That would be more like, you know, $7,000, $8,000 for every family. But this is $3,000 for literally every human being in America, and still be as rich as they were before the pandemic started. He goes on to say, yet at the same time, more than 20 million Americans are jobless, 8 million have fallen into poverty, 19 million are at risk of eviction, and 26 million are going hungry. So how did we get here? I mean, you know, have the Republicans copped to this 40-year-long hustle? Well, this study, I mean, you've heard me talk about this before, that, you know, back in the 1890s, this was called horse and sparrow economics. And, you know, the theory being that if you overfeed horses on oats, horses representing rich people, oats representing money, if you overfeed the horses in oats, their manure will have more undigested oats, and the sparrows will have more food. And that produced the Panic of 1896. And then in the 1920s, in 1920, Warren Harding revived horse and sparrow economics and, you know, brought it back, and we got this, he dropped the top tax bracket from 91% down to 25%. And the result was the Roaring '20s, when the rich got richer and working class people got so crushed during the Roaring '20s that there was this explosion of unionization efforts that led to actual murders of union officials by police all across the country. And then, of course, led directly to the crash of 1929. You would think somehow, you know, after 4 economic crashes just since Reaganomics started, I mean, you know, in 1987, we had the biggest stock market crash since 1929. This was, you know, 8-9 months after Reagan's second or third big tax cut. You had the Bush Great Recession of 1992 that helped Bill Clinton get elected. You had the second Bush Great Recession of 2008, which helped Barack Obama get elected. And then you had the Trump Great Depression of 2020. And you'd think that, you know, with 4 economic crashes since the introduction of Reaganomics in 1981, that America would have figured out this doesn't work. But no, we haven't figured it out. So these guys compiled 50 years of data over 18 countries. Our results show, the researchers write, that major tax cuts for the rich increased the top 1% of pre-tax national income in the years following the reform. The magnitude of the effect is sizable. On average, each major reform leads to a rise in top 1% share of national tax, pre-tax income of 0.8 percentage point. So the rich got richer. All this money is transferred from the pockets of working people into the pockets of the morbidly rich. But did those job creators create jobs? Well, here's what the London School of Economics says. The results also show that economic performance, as measured by real GDP per capita and the unemployment rate, is not significantly affected by major tax cuts for the rich. The estimated effect for these variables are statistically indistinguishable from zero. Right. So what's the main result of Reaganomics? Well, the London School of Economics says, overall, our analysis finds strong evidence that cutting taxes on the rich increases income inequality, but has no effect on growth or unemployment. In fact, our results suggest that lower taxes on the rich lead to high earners bargaining more forcefully to increase their own compensation at the direct expense of those lower down the income distribution. So that's what we're finding happens. So how is this playing out in America? Well, last year, in 2020 in Arizona, this is just one example, just one state, Arizona. The voters of Arizona voted to increase taxes by 3.5% on people making over $250,000 a year. Raise taxes on the rich. This was designed to raise $940 million from those taxes that would go to fund the state's crisis-ridden public school system, an underfunded public school system. So what did the Republicans in the Arizona legislature do this year? This is the year that the tax increase on rich people was supposed to go into effect in Arizona. Well, just a few months ago, they passed a law, a $1.9 billion, now keep in mind, Prop 208 was a $900 million increase in taxes. The Arizona Republicans passed a $1.9 billion tax cut that, according to the Prescott Valley News, quote, mainly benefits the wealthy to shield higher earning income taxpayers from the effects of the new 3.5% tax surcharge voters approved in November to boost education funding, end quote. In other words, they cut taxes more than the voters raised them. This is what happens when you have the Republican Party running politics and they are completely owned by, in the pocket of, a subsidiary of billionaire America. And until we get this money out of the body of our political system, these billionaire leeches are going to continue, at least the right-wing ones who are really pushing this stuff and controlling the Republican Party are going to continue to make it tough on Americans. I don't know how to say it in any other way. And this is why we need to kill the filibuster, pass the For the People Act, which will demand transparency for dark money groups at the very least. I mean, it's a small thing. And raise taxes back to where they were just 40 years ago, just the same tax rates we had before Reagan came into office, and we can put our economy back on track. So that's number one. Number two, I'm wondering how you're dealing with the heat. Yesterday, I did the show in here. It was well into the mid-90s here in the studio. Right now it's in the high 80s. When I got home, we had trees that had literally wilted. We had small trees that one of them fell over. I mean, literally wilted, and two giant trees in front of our house, all the leaves had just kind of collapsed. They just wilted. And I'm sitting there trying to work on my next book, and I just felt like crap, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. And I took my temperature, and it seemed, normal, and so I took my blood pressure, and it was 92 over 70, over 71. And I was, at that moment, I was texting with Dr. Frank, actually, because, thanking him for being on our show. And I said, what do you think this means? My blood pressure is really, really low, and I'm normally high. And he was like, that means you need to drink a lot more water. You've had too much heat. Because I felt like I was going to pass out for a couple hours yesterday. So, this is what happens when we don't get global warming under control, because we've got a bunch of fossil fuel billionaires who are fighting every single effort, and we've got an entire political party, the Republican Party. I mean, this is just my experience. We've got roads buckling all over Portland. You've got the hospital emergency rooms filled up. We don't yet have a death count in homeless camps, but I guarantee you it's going to be there. What's happened to pets? I mean, we had right out in front of our studio, there's a crow's nest. And one of the little fledgling crows, not really a chick, but, it had feathers, fell out of the nest. I mean, just so hot, bang, on the pavement, dead. We got birds falling out of the sky here when it hit 115 yesterday. We got a lot of work to do in this country. I'm telling you, we got a hell of a lot of work to do to recover from 40 years of Republican lies and tax cuts and selling out to the fossil fuel industry and selling out to the right-wing billionaires. You got, the top corporations in America pay how much in taxes? Nothing in federal income taxes. This is nuts. Anyhow, more to come. Stick around.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
I got to tell you about the right-wingers' latest outrage and also my thoughts on condos, apropos of what's going on in Florida. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Excuse me. Phew. Wow, what a day, huh? Let's see here. Pete in Seattle. Hey, Pete, thanks for listening to KBCS. What's on your mind?
Apologize. I know this is a repeat for you, but I value your opinion. I'm about to go on to Medicare, and I'm currently on a Medicare Advantage plan with SSDI, and I'll take my answer off the air, but I'm looking. Tell me again the difference in Medicare Advantage versus plain Medicare.
Oh, it's very simple, Pete. It's very straightforward. Plain Medicare has, heavily regulates, first of all, the Medigap plans that you get to supplement it, because there's a 20% hole in Medicare that the Republicans insisted on back in the 60s when LBJ passed it. So you still have to buy a Medigap policy, but, they're typically a couple $100 a month. And that gives you, basically, you can go anywhere, do anything. Medicare pays for it. They very rare. I've been on Medicare 5 years. They've never challenged anything. And that includes surgery that I had, which was very expensive, back surgery. So, straight Medicare, great. It's wonderful. Just get a good Medigap plan, and the companies with the word mutual in their name, in my opinion, do the best job. Those are companies that are owned by the people who, largely owned by the people who buy policies. The whole mutual insurance idea was hatched by Ben Franklin back in the day. He created the first mutual insurance company. They're like co-ops. Medicare Advantage, on the other hand, is privatized Medicare. It's not even Medicare. It's just, you're just buying a private insurance plan from a private insurance company that is only very lightly regulated. For example, we just discovered in New York State that one of the big unions there just shifted hundreds of thousands of their retired workers off Medicare and Medigap plans and onto a Medicare Advantage plan. Apparently they were spiffed by one of the big insurance companies, and their deductibles, their annual deductibles, went from $1,000 to $7,400. So the Medicare Advantage plans, when you get in a Medicare Advantage plan, because it's private insurance, you're going to have to check with your insurance company before you do anything. Your doctor has to be approved by your insurance company or they won't pay for you. If you go to the emergency room, they may not pay at all. They're fighting that tooth and nail all across the country. If you are out of state or out of network, they won't pay for it. You'll get huge bills. It's just a huge gotcha system, just like regular private health insurance. Medicare Advantage is a scam, and you need to run as fast and as far from it, in my humble opinion. At least this is what I would do. I can't advise you specifically, Pete, but I would run as far and as fast as possible. Well,
let me ask that so far I've been pretty successful, but
wait till you get really sick. That's when the big insurance companies will come at you.
Well, the way I made my decision on the Advantage plan between them that were presented to me as I was eligible when I first went on this was looking at the out-of-pocket maximum, because I have ongoing costs that I know I'm going to incur through the year. So I was looking at the one that was the least. And, I pay anywhere between, I think it's gone down as low as $5,000, and it's been as high as $7,000. Do Medigaps have the same kind of thing where you pay a big amount before they
Medigaps are heavily regulated by the federal government, and there's a serious cap on your out-of-pocket expenses. And some of the Medigap plans, like I'm using Plan H, I think, has no deductibles, no out-of-pocket, period. I pay nothing, and it's like an extra $60 or $80 a month. So that's the thing, Pete. Pete, I got to run. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So in addition to having our daily rant over at HartmannReport.com and the newsletter, Sue's newsletter, that has links to literally every story we talk about throughout the show over at ThomHartmann.com, and you can sign up. It's free. We also push out a video to people who are supporters of our program at ThomHartmann.com every week. And the one that goes out this week is about Loudoun County, Virginia's public schools. There is a group that is opposed to teaching critical race theory. It's called PACT, Parents Against Critical Theory. And they've been promoting the work of a guy who is among the people who marched in the so-called Unite the Right rally, where Heather Heyer was killed. The Jews will not replace us, black people will not replace us march. And he's just like making stuff up. It's really a remarkable, remarkable story. You can see the whole thing over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. Welcome back. Two other stories I just wanted to put on your radar screen and, we can discuss. The first is I got my newsletter this morning from thewriting.com. That's with an R, not a W, as in right wing, thewriting.com. And this is the Washington Examiner, the headline, "Let Gwen Berry represent a country less offensive than the U.S." She's the Olympian, the black Olympian, who turned to the side when the national anthem was played. And then over in Western Journal, the same thing. Dan Crenshaw, he's one of the right-wing Republicans who's, totally up Trump's backside. Dan Crenshaw calls for athlete who snubbed flag to be booted from Olympic team. Right. Now, let me just get this straight. These are the people who cheered and supported Trump followers who were beating police on January 6th with flags so badly that 140 of those cops ended up in the hospital. One died, one lost an eye, another lost a finger. Several of them have permanent, broken bodies and minds, permanent disabilities. These same people who supported this act of barbarous traitorism against the United States are saying, oh, we're so offended that a black athlete doesn't like the fact that one of the verses in the national anthem is basically racist. I just have to say to these conservatives at the Washington Examiner and to Dan Crenshaw and whatnot, get a life. Come on, figure out what's real here, guys. This is pathetic. I mean, this is genuinely pathetic. That these sanctimonious right-wingers are going around. We're so patriotic. Oh, they're killing cops with flagpoles? With U.S. flags on them? Oh, no problem at all. In fact, it's just a day in the park. In fact, it's just like tourist day at the Capitol building. These Republicans lie through their teeth on Fox News and the other right-wing networks. But a black athlete disrespects the national anthem because it has an entire verse that's basically racist? Oh, we can't have that. She's got to be kicked out of the Olympics. Seriously? Seriously, guys? This is the hill you're going to die on? I mean, this is... oh, my God. I got to give you my take on condos, and not necessarily this is exactly what happened in Florida, but I am willing to bet as time goes on that we are going to find that what I'm going to tell you about is exactly what happened in Florida. And actually, I think I'm going to move that rant to the second half of the second hour here. We'll talk about that in the second hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
There's plenty to talk about in this hour right now about the heat and the billionaires and beating cops with flags.
Our book for today is Kickback, Exposing the Global Corporate Bribery Network by David Montero. This is from the introduction, Chapter 1. During Watergate, the appointment of a special prosecutor to investigate Richard Nixon's alleged tampering with elections was intended to mark the close of a sordid chapter in American history. Instead, that effort, culminating in Nixon's resignation, would prove to be only the beginning of a deeper political morass that America would face for decades to come. Congressional investigations would uncover for the first time that multinational corporations, through slush funds and bribes, were not only secretly funding political organizations at home, like Nixon's re-election campaign, but corrupting foreign officials abroad. This new perspective on the corporate abuse of power and its impact overseas would result in the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, FPCA, groundbreaking legislation that, by prohibiting commercial bribery for the first time in history, sought to change how capitalism and political affairs were conducted all around the world. Now, more than 40 years later, we are experiencing a kind of deja vu as the special counsel investigates whether the president allegedly abused his power, again by obstructing an inquiry into a possible manipulation of our country's elections. Just as was the case in Watergate, whatever special counsel Robert Mueller uncovers will likely mark the beginning, rather than the end, of a reassessment of how power actually operates in this country. And just as in Watergate, there's the possibility that Mueller's far-reaching probe may reveal how tightly political corruption and corporate corruption are linked through bribery, just under the surface of America's political life. Nixon was the recipient of secret corporate donations, which were considered illegal because they should have been disclosed. But the payments, while unlawful, did not compromise the presidential election itself. Mueller's Russian inquiry is directed at a potentially far more serious crime, whether Donald Trump, the head of a sprawling business empire, colluded with a foreign power to deliberately sway the American electorate, committing the very crime that the FCPA had been trying to eradicate since Watergate, the offer of a foreign bribe, a kickback. That law specifically states that a corporate bribe need not involve an actual exchange of money. An offer of anything of value, such as a promise to a foreign government official, is sufficient to violate its terms. This is precisely what Mueller is trying to ascertain, whether Trump, his company, his associates, or his family, or some combination of them, offered a promise to Russian government officials, a quid pro quo, that if they helped Trump by manipulating the elections, Trump, if victorious, would ease U.S. sanctions against Russia. Doing so would allow greater U.S. investment of Russia and would benefit Russian officials and oligarchs, the Trump business organization, the corporate interests of the Trump family, and former members of his senior staff, including Paul Manafort, his one-time campaign chairman, and Michael Flynn, his disgraced national security advisor. If the Trump organization or anyone connected with it did make such a promise, and depending on how that promise was conveyed to Russian officials, the Justice Department would have strong grounds for pursuing an FCPA charge, among others. An FCPA violation is within Mueller's mandate to investigate, quote, any matters that arose or may arise directly from this investigation. As has been widely observed, Mueller has hired 2 former federal law enforcement officials with extensive experience in investigating fraud, money laundering, and overseas bribery. Andrew Weissman, who ran the Justice Department's fraud section, which enforces the FCPA, and Greg Andres, who helped oversee FCPA policy in the criminal division. The drama playing out in Washington starkly highlights the fact that foreign corporate bribery can be a deeply misleading term. We've come to regard it, when we think of it at all, as something that unscrupulous companies do in distant countries, so that any impact it has must be contained overseas. If a corporation pays kickbacks to a greedy government official abroad, why should we be concerned? But in a highly interconnected world, bound together by a global market, a global financial system, and the constant migration of peoples, goods, capital, corruption rarely stays out there. Bribes eventually harm Americans, American society, American values, and American interests, both domestically and around the world, in ways that are difficult to gauge. Why do firms resort to bribery? The obvious reason is to gain an advantage over their competitors. But illicit payments also buy the illusion of growth in the short term, of increased market share and inflated firm value. It does not take into account the harm that this practice causes to companies themselves, sinking employee morale, diminished profit margins, and the possibility of hundreds of millions of dollars in fines and penalties, not to mention a reputation that will be associated with corruption and deceit. They also effectively steal the public's money because the majority of bribery cases involve capital-intensive development and infrastructure projects such as roads, dams, defense systems, oil extraction, or mining that are publicly funded. To recoup the bribes involved in winning such contracts, companies conspire with foreign officials to inflate the costs, sometimes by 10 or even hundreds of millions of dollars. While the companies and the officials win out, taxpayers are left shouldering the burden. Corporate bribes involve a remarkable amount of money. The World Bank has estimated $1 trillion a year, although this may represent the high end. Others have placed the market at 10% of the $4 trillion spent annually on global public procurement. The book Kickback by David Montero. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. Just a reminder that my daily rants are published every day over at hartmannreport.com. And our podcast, our 1 hour podcast of the show, which is entirely free, is available through, iTunes and all the normal places where you find podcasts. Cut down of our show, and that we post a weekly video over at thomhartmann.com. And the one this week is about seditious conspiracy, U.S. Code 2384. And the argument I'm making is that this law, which imposes 20 years in prison to, by force, prevent, hinder, or delay the execution of any law of the United States, end quote, is something that we should be seriously considering dusting off and applying to not just the people who showed up on January 6th, but the people who sent them there. Check it out, thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Nate just came, and bless you, Nate, thank you. Nate just came over and poured about a quarter of a cup of water down the back of my shirt. So, it doesn't show up on TV, but the whole back of my shirt is soaking wet, and we got fans running in here because, like I said, I'm not sure the exact temperature, but it's got to be pushing 90 in the studio. But I'm starting to feel normal, which is really cool. So a lot on our table, and what's on your mind? Spencer in Chicago. Hey, Spencer, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Hey, I want more Democrats and Democratic representatives to counter the Republicans' talk of how patriotic they are by mentioning that during the Capitol insurrection, they removed the American flag from the Capitol and put up a Trump flag. That is not patriotic.
Honest to God?
Counteract.
At the top of the Capitol?
Absolutely, on video.
Whoa.
On video.
Whoa, I missed that somehow. That's incredible. I mean, it's not surprising, but
yeah.
I mean, when you're
pull up that video.
Yeah, when you're trying to beat police to death with American flags, I don't think you can claim patriotism, and I don't think you have any right whatsoever to argue that Gwen Berry shouldn't be in the Olympics.
Absolutely. And again, replacing the American flag with the Trump flag is about as diametrically opposed to being patriotic as you can be. And I think you can use that against, them saying it was tourists in the Capitol. Tourists don't take down the American flag and replace it with the Trump flag.
Yeah, I'm with you. Spencer, thank you. Very well said. Dave in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Hey, not too much, Tom. Hey, I know we don't like to revisit the Trump administration, but I really think it's worth it in the context of revelations that the Lafayette Square. Remember the Lafayette Square incident and the protesters? The interaction between Trump and Milley are really remarkable, and I think everybody should take note of that because, look, general officers generally don't cede power. Right? And Trump tried to put Milley in charge of basically usurping the Constitution, of basically turning America into an autocracy.
Yeah, well, here's exactly what happened for people who don't know what we're talking about. The Lafayette Square incident was the Trump Bible photo op, where there were peaceful protesters in a public area on public property, which is entirely allowed by the First Amendment of the Constitution, and Donald Trump ordered it cleared. Bill Barr visited the site. Moments later, they started attacking protesters with batons, beating them, and tear gassed them, and cleared the area so that Trump could walk in there and wave his Bible around. And it turns out that Trump had asked Milley to use the military, which is illegal. You know, I mean, this is the Posse Comitatus Act. The military may not turn their guns on civilians, but Trump had ordered Milley to do this, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and Milley said no. And Trump said, you must do this because I'm the president. And Milley said, we've got a room full of lawyers here. Somebody tell him that he's wrong. And somebody did. And apparently it was maybe it was Bill Barr. I'd have to go back and read the story. But Dave is absolutely spot on that. And that's how close we came. If Milley had ordered the military to start playing law enforcement functions in the United States, it would have been the end of our democracy, or it could have easily been, or at least the first stage in the end of our democracy. Dave in New Brunswick, New Jersey. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind today?
Hey, I just read that United Airlines had a record order of airline jets, which I find sadly ironic that the Northwest is setting new record temperatures. I wonder how historians are going to record this. You know, the sad irony is that there should be private transportation such as bullet trains and, right. Big expansion of public transportation. And yet, no one, it's 2021 and no one has realized, what we need to do about climate change.
Yeah, I think a lot of us have realized it, but we literally have an entire political party that is denying global warming. And that point does not get made often enough on television, that these guys are lying through their teeth to all of us on behalf of the billionaire class. And it is wrong. It is criminal. Thank you for that call. Paul in Woodinville, Washington. Hey, Paul, what's up?
Hey, Tom. So I'm going to ask you a question here, but I need to weave my point by first answering your question about the economy and something about yesterday. So in the last 40 years, the rich have stolen $30 trillion from the United States. And that's why we have a $30 trillion national tax cut, starting with the Reagan tax cut. They haven't paid for what it costs to operate this country.
That's correct.
And, yeah. So what has been our operating costs have essentially been borrowed, because when Ronald Reagan took office, the national debt was $800 billion. That's what our military budget is now. Was the entirety of the national debt in 1981 when Ronald Reagan took office. $800 billion was the debt that the country had for the 205 years or whatever it was that we were a nation, right?
Yeah, that's 0.8 of $1 billion for people who don't do the math fast in their head. It's not even, or $1 trillion. It's not even $1 trillion was the debt when Reagan came in. And by the way, when Reagan left, it was $2.4 trillion.
Yeah, and then after Bush left, it was $3.2 trillion. They quadrupled the national debt.
Right, in 12 years.
Yeah, that's what Reagan Bush did. Okay, and so I don't care how people want to slice it, but the debt in the last 4 years under Donald Trump, they added $9.5 trillion. So the rich are just basically, and this close to the point of Madison's, the Federalist 10, where he talks about we cannot allow corporations to become so rich, wealthier than the government, and that's what's happened. It's gotten to the threshold. Well, now the rich and the corporations are actually more as powerful, and they don't have to have as much to be as powerful as the government. They just have to have enough, and that's what's become where we are. Okay, so then we come to yesterday. You had a guest, Rachel, I can't remember her last name, was talking about what are the Democrats going to do, and I've always said they need to take a Promethean approach. And for people who don't know this, look up the myth of Prometheus. It means a daringly creative approach. The Republicans have changed the tactic from fighting for the globular middle to a polarized race. And in a polarization, you have basically roughly things will hang equally at both sides, and then you just have to capture the snapshot where in the steady state it's more on your side at one time or another. But this is the question I have for you, Tom.
Before you get to the question, Paul, let me just restate my understanding of what you just said, just in the event I got it wrong. And that is that somewhere in the last 40 years, most likely toward the end of the Reagan administration, but certainly with Bush and the Willie Horton ads in '92, somewhere in that period of time, the Republican Party determined that basically the only way they could win elections was to start tearing America, to pit Americans against each other, to create division and hatred between Americans against Americans. And that has been their strategy ever since, and it has reached its logical conclusion now, where people with Trump bumper stickers are running people off the road, where they tried to run, the Kamala Harris bus off the road down in Texas. Now there's a lawsuit around this, where they invaded the Capitol building, where, if you wear an F Trump T-shirt, you're likely to get, it's all this stuff. Am I saying what you said?
Yeah, exactly. I'm just saying that they know that the traditional political strategy of fighting for the globular middle,
Right.
they can't win.
Giving people what they want.
Polarize.
Right.
Yeah.
So instead they tear people apart.
Yeah, you polarize it. You can catch it at, you can catch the polarization at a snapshot in time, hopefully on election day, where it falls in your favor. And with the Electoral College, you got a pretty good bet at doing that. So my question is, I couldn't think of the answers. That what could Joe Biden or Chuck Schumer say that would make Mitch McConnell say, "You wouldn't dare. You wouldn't dare"?
We're going to have the filibuster.
I can't think of it because that's the Promethean approach. That's the Promethean question that I'm saying, is that what could Joe Biden say that would make Mitch McConnell say, "You wouldn't dare"? I can think of lots of things that Mitch McConnell would say that Joe Biden would say, "You wouldn't dare." But that's how I know we are losing, because I can't think of anything that Joe Biden would say that Mitch McConnell would find to be a threat.
We're going to repeal 40 years of, three administrations that engaged in Republican administrations that engaged in massive tax cuts, because the results of the experiment are in, and all it did was make billionaires. What are these guys doing with their money? They're buying 400-foot mega yachts and blasting themselves into outer space. And that money should be in the pockets of working-class Americans.
Yes, they've taken all the money out of the economy. That's why they had to borrow the money, and that's why the economy is going into the toilet.
So we're going to take our money back.
Richard Wolff comes in and tells us every week.
Yeah.
That's what they've done and Madison wrote about that, is that's why wealth should be taxed, because that's money that's just pooling. That's like bad health. That's like blood pooling in your feet. Yeah. You've got to have the money circulated, and they're not. If they won't spend it, they need to have it taxed.
Yeah,
so that
which is Elizabeth Warren's wealth tax, which would definitely get a "you don't dare" from Mitch McConnell. Paul, interesting question, a Promethean issue. Thank you. It's great to hear from you. We'll be right back. It's 46 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
As I'm starting on my second quart of water here, we'll be back with more of your calls. Stick around. And welcome back. Johnny in Phelan, California. Hey, Johnny, thanks for listening to KPFK. What's on your mind?
Good morning, Tom. Thanks for an Anything Goes Tuesday. In 2010, approximately, Hillary Clinton and the State Department did something in Libya to help overthrow Muammar Gaddafi. And a civil war ensued. And it's still going on, apparently. I can't get very good statistics, maybe 1 million dead people. A lot of them are women and children, I'm sure. But voting for Jill Stein in 2016 has brought me under all of us under a lot of attacks from the left. And I guess it came down to a choice of, were the Democratic picks for the Supreme Court worth more than those dead people in Libya?
I suspect, I think it's much larger than that, frankly, and I don't know if the Clinton administration would have continued down that road or not. But, you know, you're right. There have been a number of military adventures that this country has engaged in over the years, from, you know, the Reagan administration screwing up Central America, which is now producing refugees on our southern border and has been for decades, to, you know, executing Gaddafi, and for that matter, the Bush, you know, George W. Bush, executing Saddam Hussein, who was doing absolutely nothing other than writing a 3-volume trilogy romance novel. I mean, that literally is what Saddam Hussein was up to. He had no weapons of mass destruction or anything else. He just happened to be sitting on the second largest supply of oil in the world. So I don't think you can isolate this to Hillary Clinton or the Democratic Party. I think it's a much larger and deeper cancer in our society and our culture. The use of war, it's what Dwight Eisenhower identified on January, well, maybe it was in December, late December of 1960, in his farewell address to the American people when John Kennedy was coming in, and he called out the military-industrial, and in his original speech it was military-industrial congressional complex. But you know, the problem, Johnny, is because we are one of only 7 countries in the world that has first-past-the-post, winner-take-all voting, and we don't have, like New Zealand and Australia do, you know, instant runoff voting for federal elections, you end up with a 2-party system. And if you vote for a third party that is on the same side as one of those 2 parties, you are taking away votes from one of those 2 parties. So I think the important work we have to do, rather than, you know, voting for Jill Stein, is infiltrate the Democratic Party, you know, and take it over. And in fact,
I couldn't agree more. Yeah.
In fact, I think I'll do a rant on the other side of this, in the second hour, you know, about that topic. I've got a great little video that I can share with you all. But I have to get it to Nate so that we can talk about it. You know, we'll do that during the break at the top of the hour.
Well, you know,
go ahead.
The reason I reduced it down like that was because I thought that was one way to get most directly to the point. That's all.
Yeah. No, I get it, Johnny. And you know, I mean, I voted for Ralph Nader in 2000, but I lived in Vermont, and I knew that I was not going to affect the Electoral College. You lived in California. You were not going to affect the Electoral College. And so it was a way of saying, you know, hey, we want some more progressive policies than the Democratic Party is offering. And I think the Democratic Party took notice of that. But, you know, had I lived in Florida and voted for Al Gore, you know, I'd be suffering from a little bit of a guilt complex right now. But you know, I totally get it. Johnny, thank you for the call. It's 10 minutes before the hour. We'll be right back with more of your calls. Stick around. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. Over at the Thom Hartmann website, thomhartmann.com, we have, you know, the full podcasts and there's just a lot of information, and our newsletter. And the newsletter is extraordinary. It's free. Sue puts it together every day with her stack, and it's just great content. Links to every single article that I talk about on the air, and you know, and things that are peripheral to them as well. It's really worth the effort. And then, of course, at HartmannReport.com, there is my daily rant, which is typically incorporated into the program, but it's a written version of it, and that's also something that there's no cost for that at all. So you can check that out as well. Also, we've got a new video up about the dueling memes. If at first you don't succeed, try again, or the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting a different result. Schumer is going to try to do what Harry Reid did in 2013 by forcing votes. Will it work? We'll see. Check it out at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Also in the second hour today, in addition to my condo rant, I'm going to be sharing with you a very brief video about who are the most powerful people in America and how the Tea Party took over America. And I think you're going to be, it's been probably 10 years since I played this on the air. I was talking to Marianne Williamson last night. We got in a long conversation about this, and it completely reminded me of this. And so I will share that with you in the second hour of our program. We'll continue. But right now, I'm picking up your phone calls. Leonard in Pasadena, California. Hey, Leonard, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. I want my news regulated. And the
By
regulation
whom?
would be the truth. Huh?
By whom? Do you want Donald Trump to regulate it when he's president again?
No, this is the regulation. One regulation, the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
But who decides what the truth
now.
is?
Well, people can call in. There's ways of seeing that this truth is there, and it's also the truth because people can call in and challenge it. It needs to be truthful constantly, completely, because people can't see what happened on the government on the first is because of propaganda. Propaganda kills. It's all about greed. The whole thing is nothing but incredible greed.
I get all that, Leonard, and I agree with your premise. And I've been doing this program for 18 years, and during that entire time, one of the rules that our call screener, Joyce, right now is our call screener. One of the rules that we have for call screening is if somebody calls to correct me, if I got some consequential matter of fact wrong, or if I simply said something wrong and I learned that I had it wrong, I will fix that on the air, because I want people to know that when they listen to this program, they can take whatever I say to the bank, and I can back up what I have to say. On the other hand, if you try to call into one of these right-wing shows and challenge the host, the call screener will never, ever, ever let you through. Unless you sound like, just a totally dippy person that they can make fun of. If somebody who's a progressive calls in who's got, some, stumbles over their words or can't, form a coherent thought, they love putting those people in the air, but that's it. And, but I'm very worried, Leonard, about the federal government or even state governments, for that matter, deciding what is truth. And that's why I think the First Amendment was such a good idea. And it's why Jefferson said, if I had to choose between a government without newspapers or newspapers without a government, I would choose the newspapers without a government. I'm there. Leonard, I get your outrage. Government censorship, though, in my opinion, is not the solution. Charles, there are solutions that involve, breaking up giant media monopolies and things like that. But Charles in Miami, Florida. Hey, Charles, what's up?
Hey, how you doing, Tom?
Good.
My thing is, every time I'm trying to how much big is, money they work.
Charles, your phone is popping in and out, and I can't understand what you're saying. I'm going to put you on hold and let Joyce talk to you. Maybe you just need to stand in a different place or something like that. Lisa in Puyallup, Washington. Hey, Lisa, what's up?
I'd like to know, Tom, do the Democrats have 50 votes to eliminate the filibuster? And if they do not, what are our marching orders besides calling your senator and protesting? And would an approach of, if you can't beat them, join them, progressives get on the floor and use the filibuster to teach critical race theory on things that Republicans try to get through on bills?
Yeah, I'm with you. No, they don't have 50 votes right now. If we are to take Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin at their word, they have both published op-eds in the Washington Post, I believe, maybe the New York Times was one of them, saying specifically that they oppose ending the filibuster. And they're doing this because they are part of this so-called problem solver caucus, which was founded by the No Labels Group, which was created by a bunch of hedge fund billionaires. And so the question is, what are our marching orders? How do we deal with this? Number one, if you know anybody in Arizona or West Virginia, call them and ask them to start lobbying their senator, basically, talking to their senator. We need to put pressure on them, but frankly, your calling from Washington State to Joe Manchin's office in West Virginia will not have much impact. But if you know anybody in West Virginia, or if you go on social media and just say to anybody who follows you, if you know anybody in West Virginia or anybody in Arizona, please do this. That's number one. Number two, get inside the Democratic Party. We need to get more progressives in office. We really need to be doing this work. I'll be talking about that more in the second hour. And number three, hook up with one of the organizations that's doing this work. And I think probably the premier one right now is indivisible.org. And you can just go to their website, indivisible.org, get on their mailing list, and see if it's a good fit for you. There's a lot of other groups out there, but join somebody. And because, together, what did Ben Franklin say? If we don't hang together, we shall surely hang separately. We need to work together. Lisa, I got to run, but thank you for the call. That was a great one. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info is available at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. EasyFlow, personal air filtration system. Fresh air anywhere. More info at easyflowusa.com, code TOM. Masterclass with world-class instructors. More info at masterclass.com/Hartman. And Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Defying Hitler by Sebastian Haffner, a memoir. This is from chapter 17, about a little more than a third of the way into the book. At first, the revolution only gave the impression of being an historical event like any other, a matter for the press that might just possibly have some effect on the public mood. The Nazis celebrate January 30th as their day of revolution. They are wrong. There was no revolution on January 30th, 1933, just a change of government. Hitler became chancellor, by no means the Führer of the Nazi regime. The cabinet contained only 2 Nazis apart from him. He swore an oath of allegiance to the Weimar Constitution. The general opinion was that it was not the Nazis who had won, but the bourgeois parties of the right, who had captured, in quotes, the Nazis and held all the key positions in the government. In constitutional terms, events had taken a much more conventional, unrevolutionary course than most of what had happened during the previous 6 months. Outwardly also, the day had no revolutionary aspects, unless one considers a Nazi torchlight procession through Wilhelmstrasse or a minor gunfight in the suburbs that night as signs of a revolution. For most of us outsiders, the experience of January 30th, 1933 was that of reading the papers and the emotions we felt while we were doing so. The morning headline was, "Hitler called to president." That produced a certain nervous, impotent irritation. Hitler had been called to the president in August and November. He had been offered the vice-chancellorship and then the chancellorship. Both times he had set impossible conditions, and both times there had been solemn declarations, "Never again." Each time, "never again" had lasted exactly 3 months. Hitler's opponents in Germany at that time suffered from a compulsive urge to offer him everything he wanted, indefatigably, and at an even cheaper price. Indeed, to press it upon him. It's the same now with his opponents outside Germany. Again and again, this appeasement was formally renounced, and again it gaily reappeared at the crucial moment. Just so today. Then, as now, one's only hope was Hitler's own unreasonableness. Would it not sooner or later exhaust the patience of his opponents? Then, as now, it became apparent that their patience knew no bounds. At midday, the headline said, "Hitler makes impossible demands." We nodded, half reassured. It was only too credible. It would have gone against his nature to ask for less than too much. Perhaps the cup had once more passed from us. Hitler, the last defense against Hitler. At about 5 o'clock, the evening papers arrived. Cabinet of National Unity formed formed Hitler Reichschancellor. I don't know what the general reaction was. For about a minute, mine was completely correct. Icy horror. Certainly this had been a possibility for a long time. You had to reckon with it. Nevertheless, it was so bizarre, so incredible to read it now in black and white. Hitler Reichschancellor. For a moment, I physically sensed the man's odor of blood and filth, the nauseating approach of a man-eating animal, its foul, sharp claws in my face. Then I shook the sensation off, tried to smile, started to consider, and found many reasons for reassurance. That evening, I discussed the prospects of the new government with my father. We agreed it had a good chance of doing a lot of damage, but not much chance of surviving very long. A deeply reactionary government with Hitler as its mouthpiece. Apart from this, it did not really differ much from the two governments that had succeeded Bruning's. Even with the Nazis, it would not have a majority in the Reichstag. Of course, that could always be dissolved, but the government had a clear majority of the population against it, in particular the working class, which would probably go communist now that the Social Democrats had completely discredited themselves. One could prohibit the communists, but that would only make them more dangerous. In the meantime, the government would be likely to implement reactionary social and cultural measures with some anti-Semitic additions to please Hitler. That would not attract any of its opponents to its side. Foreign policy would probably be a matter of banging the table. There might be an attempt to rearm. That would automatically add the outside world to the 60% of the home population who were against the Hitler government. Besides, who were the people who had suddenly started voting Nazi in the last 3 years? Misguided ignoramuses, for the most part, victims of propaganda, a fluctuating mass that would fall apart at the first disappointment. No, all things considered, this government was not a cause for alarm. The only question was what would come after it. It was possible that they would drive the country to civil war. The communists were capable of going on the attack before a prohibition against them came into force. The next day, this turned out to be the general opinion of the intelligent press. It is curious how plausible an argument it is, even today, when we know what came next. How could things turn out so completely different? Perhaps it was just because we were all so certain that they could not do so, and relied on that with far too much confidence. So we neglected to consider that it might, if worse came to worse, be necessary to prevent the disaster from happening. Through the whole of February 1933, everything that happened remained a matter for the press. In other words, it took place in an arena that would lose all reality for 99% of the population the moment there were no newspapers. Admittedly, enough occurred in that arena. The Reichstag was dissolved. Then in a flagrant breach of the Constitution, Hindenburg also dissolved the Prussian regional parliament. There were fast and furious changes of personnel in the civil service. The book defined Hitler.
I know this is a little off topic, but we got an email from Daily Kos this morning that said the
members of Kushner's companies knew what was going on. The book by Vicki Ward, Kushner, Inc., Greed, Ambition, Corruption.
You know, Biden and Harris, and that would install Trump as president.
Wait a minute. What's going to happen? Oh, they're going to make Trump say
Yes.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Impeach Biden and Harris.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to our second hour. I want to get into vaccine passports, condos, and the rise of the right and what Democrats can do. So we got a lot here. I want to start out here in Oregon. I don't know how it works in your state, but here in Oregon, you can sign up with the state health department, and it's it's very easy to find out. It's on their websites and everything, to get a daily little kind of email summary of what the coronavirus situation is in Oregon. And they list how many infections have been reported by county throughout the entire state. We had a total of, I think, 83 or 87 yesterday. How many deaths? I think we had no deaths yesterday. All of the deaths that we're having now are unvaccinated people. They list whether those people had pre-existing conditions, things like that. And yesterday, in this little email that I got from the state of Oregon, they included, because there's all this concern about breakthrough infections. You know, what happens if I've been vaccinated and I sit, in a restaurant next to some mask hole who's not vaccinated, who has a fulminating case of COVID and doesn't realize it yet because people are really contagious for a couple of days before they start getting symptoms. What happens if I get, massively exposed to like the Delta variant and it breaks through and I get sick? And people are freaked out about this in Oregon and around the country. And by the way, countries are as well. Israel just announced, because of the Delta variant, and most of the country is vaccinated in Israel. They did a really good job of this, one of the best in the world. Israel just announced they're reimposing mask mandates indoors. The United Kingdom just pulled back on, Britain just pulled back on some of their, openings. Other countries in Europe doing the same thing. So this physician, he's a family doctor, a family physician in Medford, Oregon. His name is Dr. Robert Jackman. And just, a great guy and you're just a regular doctor. And he was fully vaccinated way back in December, and he got a breakthrough infection. And he tells the story of it. This is 42 seconds. And it just took my fear away. So let me play this for you. Here it is.
Besides being a practicing family physician and one of the first people to be vaccinated here just before Christmas, I'm one of the few breakthrough cases in Oregon. Despite all my precautions, I still became infected. Because of my vaccination, though, my experience of COVID-19 was much less severe than most of the patients I've cared for in our isolation unit. My symptoms from COVID-19 only lasted about 8 hours, and they were not much worse than the very mild and minor side effects I experienced from my second vaccine. I can tell you from firsthand experience, the vaccinations work. I also implore you to get vaccinated.
I mean, just very, very straightforward. He's saying, you've got to get vaccinated. I mean, it's like, and if you do get vaccinated, you're not going to have these terrible symptoms. So why don't we have vaccine passports? Why can't I go to a restaurant and know that the guy next to me is not going to make me sick? Well, maybe getting sick from the guy next to me is not such a terrible thing, but on the other hand, I'd really rather not get COVID. Wouldn't you? I mean, so, let's have a serious conversation about that. So that's the number one thing I wanted to share with you. The number two thing I wanted to share with you is about condominiums. Louise and I have lived in a number of communities where there were homeowners associations that were basically condoized. We lived in a floating home community that was like that. And we've lived in a couple of other places, one that was duplex condos, another that was housing condos. And here's the scam. And there are a few states, there's about a dozen states that have started doing something about this just in the last couple of years. But most of these condos were built back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, certainly the one that collapsed in Florida. And the developers, when they build a condo, let's say that they're going to sell the condo for $100,000. And there's this homeowner's fee that, pays for pool maintenance and lawn maintenance and in some cases the siding on the outside of the houses and the roofs need to be replaced every 10 or 20 years and all this kind of stuff. But the developers who are selling the condo don't want that fee to be high because that reduces the willingness of people to buy the condos, which reduces their profits. So they don't. So they set a fee of maybe $100 a month, or $300 a month, or $400 a month, or whatever it may be. I know one of the condos that we lived in, it had started at like $30 a month, and it was up to $400 when we left. And we left, frankly, because the board was so dysfunctionally, they were not doing what they needed to do in terms of maintenance. And so the developer sells the condos at, let's say, $100,000. Here's a condo, it's $100, whether it's an apartment or whether it's a duplex or whatever it may be. Here's the, for $100,000. And the fee is only $100 a month. And people go, well, I can afford that. But that $100 a month does not include what is going to be in 10 years the cost of replacing the roof. Or what's going to be in 20 years or even 30 years the cost of replacing the foundation. Or, as in the case of this condo in Florida, the cost of replacing, the pool area that had deteriorated, that appears to be now, what caused this collapse. And down in Florida, this Champlain condos, they figured this out. The Homeowners Association figured out that, holy cow, we've got a big problem, because they had this inspection back in 2018. And they had just like a month or 3 ago hit their homeowners with an $80,000 assessment. Everybody who had a condo there had to cough up 80 grand. People were literally borrowing against the value of their condos to pay this $80,000 in so that they could do the repairs to prevent the building from collapsing. Why did they have to pay 80 grand? Because for the 40 years the condo had been there, the condo association monthly fee had not had an extra $30 or $40 added to it that would have built a reserve that would have covered those kind of maintenance costs. And why didn't they have that reserve in there? Because the developers were greedy and because it was unregulated. This is deregulation on steroids. And I'm telling you, if you've lived in a condo, you know what I'm talking about. At least if you've lived in one that was built more than 10 or 20 years ago, and all of a sudden stuff is going wrong, and the condo association is going, well, we're going to have to do a $20,000 assessment. We're going to have to do a $60,000. There's a condo near where we live now where they just did it. I forget the exact amount. I think it was like $60,000 assessment because they had to reside the whole place because the siding was rotting. It's been there for 30, 40 years. Well, this should not be the case, right? It should be that these are built into the fees all along this time. So, and DeSantis down in Florida actually last year, and I believe I retweeted this yesterday. It was all over Twitter. DeSantis had he called it a deregulation-a-thon, where he invited companies and people to this public meeting to come in and suggest which regulations should be cut. And one of the areas that he suggested in the official announcement was, regulations of developers. Really? We want to deregulate developers even more? When they've been running this scam ever since condos became a big thing back in the 60s and 70s? It's nuts. I mean, this is just, like I said, this is how developers make more money. They sell these things more easily, and people buy them thinking, oh, my condo fee is not going to be that high. And then, and they just pass it down basically to future generations of homeowners. 30 years later, somebody else owns the condo, and they're thinking, oh, I'm only paying $100 a month in my condo fee or $400 a month in my condo, when they're about to get hit with an $80,000 assessment, which is exactly the amount that they used in Champlain Towers down there. Anyhow, end of rant.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
There are some things that do require a regulation, and frankly, I think this is one of them. It's 15 minutes past the hour. I got to tell you about the Concord Project after this, how the Republicans got taken over. And welcome back. Ellie in Los Angeles, listening on KPFK. Hey, Ellie, what's up?
Hey, Tom, appreciate your show. Still kind of on the condo thing, but from a different angle. So yesterday, you were using the point that the media, was like disaster porn, how much they were talking about this one building, and meanwhile, climate change is overtaking the world. And I just wanted to point out to you, the damage that caused the building to collapse was not just the pooling of water in the basement. The rising tides from climate change, salt water is ingressing into the soil. And that's where the concrete foundations are with the rebar. Yep. The salt water gets into the concrete and the rebar breaks it up, breaks it down. Plus, the water is causing the soil, which is around the foundations, to subside. You have subsidence of the soil, and that is cumulative. And all of a sudden, a whole bunch of soil gives way, just like in a landslide. Now you've got an instantaneous collapse, pancaking.
Yeah, climate scientists have been saying for some time that one of the results of climate change will be that coastal communities are going to start seeing not just flooding and not just inundation by water, but they're going to see structural damage being done to buildings. You're going to have, homes, high rises, office buildings become uninhabitable. And guess what? That's what just happened.
That is what's happening. So it is tied into the whole climate change scenario.
Right.
Not just, All right.
Absolutely.
Anyway.
Well said. Thank you very much. Appreciate the call, Eli, excuse me. Lily in Sacramento. Hey, Lily, what's up?
Hey, I have a question for you. Republicans in the Supreme Court argue that the money spent by corporations on elections is protected free speech.
Right.
Why is not our right to vote protected by the First Amendment as free speech as well?
Well, I think our right to vote should be protected by the at least 3 places in the Constitution where it references a right to vote. But actually, that's a great point, Lily. I had never thought of that. That your right to speak should be considered, that your right to vote should be considered part of your First Amendment right to speak. You are speaking about who you want representing you.
Yeah.
Lily, you're brilliant. I've got to write that up as an op-ed. I mean, I'll steal your idea. It's, and why hasn't the Supreme Court said this? Well, because the Supreme Court, with the exception of maybe 2 or 3 10 to 20-year periods in the entire history of the United States, the Supreme Court has always been dominated by conservatives. And that's why the Supreme Court has always been the most regressive, backward-looking, backward-behaving institutions of government or governance, the 3 branches of our government. But spot on, Lily. That is wow. I just learned something. What a great revelation.
It's true. I mean, as far as the Supreme Court goes, they are trained as corporate lawyers. So who are the benefits now?
Yeah, virtually all of the right-wingers have been corporate lawyers. You're absolutely right. Lily, I got to run, but thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you. It's 19 minutes past the hour. Back with more of your calls in 1 minute after I just read an ad over here on the commercial side of the show. Stick around. We'll be right back. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Over at thomhartmann.com, we have our newsletter, our regular newsletter that Sue puts together every day. It's got a link in it to every single article that I talk about on the air. So you can see, the backup for everything that I have to say. It's free. There's some ads in it that just, pay for it, basically, but that's it. There's that. And then, of course, over at HartmannReport.com, also no charge, there is our daily rant. So those are 2 things on the internet that we have. We also, periodically put up videos specifically for the people who are supporters of our program. And you can find our most recent one. It's about guns. This sheriff in Volusia County, the sheriff deputy there, asking the media, where have we gone wrong when a 14-year-old girl and a 12-year-old boy are having a shootout with deputies? And Texas passing this bizarre new gun law. Anyhow, it's all over at thomhartmann.com. You can find it right there. Check it out. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and trying to get this video up. And here it is, I think. No, that's not it. Hang on just a second. I had to read an ad and I lost it. Here we go. Okay, this I have told you before about how after the election of Barack Obama, the right was shocked, and the hard right, the so-called conservatives, decided we need to take over the Republican Party, right? No more Mitt Romneys, no more, all of the, well, it wasn't Romney in 2008, it was John McCain, but no more friendly Republicans. We're going to go all in on the so-called conservatives. And these videos started being pushed out all over the country to activists, to Tea Party members. And this is how the Tea Party took over the GOP. And frankly, it's how progressives can and should take over the Democratic Party. So this is over on YouTube. It's titled "Why Precinct Committeemen Are the Most Powerful Political Office in the World." It's from a YouTube channel called Concord Project. I want to fully acknowledge them. They did a great job with this. They are absolutely correct in everything they're saying. And, you know, here's the spokesperson. I'm sorry I don't have his name right off the top, but here he is telling you how, and again, keep in mind, he's speaking to Republican conservative activists who want to take over the Republican Party back in the day.
What is the most powerful political office in the world? It is not the President of the United States. It's the precinct committeeman. Why is that? There's three main reasons. First, because precinct committeemen and only precinct committeemen get to elect the leaders of the two major political parties. If you want to elect the leadership of one of the two major political parties in this country, you have to join that party, become registered in it, and become a precinct committeeman. Second, precinct committeemen and only precinct committeemen can vote in the internal elections to endorse candidates in the all-important, traditionally very low turnout primary elections. If a candidate wants to win the general election, he first has to get onto the general election ballot. To get on the general election ballot, he has to win the primary election. And the best way to win the primary election is to get the endorsement of as many party committees as possible. Precinct committeemen are organized into committees. For example, every county has a party committee. Every state legislative district has a committee. Legislative districts elect the people's representatives to the state legislature. Third, in some states, when a vacancy occurs in the state in a state legislator's office, let's say someone leaves to run for another office, or an incumbent passes away or resigns, the precinct committeeman and only the precinct committeeman get to nominate the nominees to fill that vacancy. For example, here in Arizona, where I live, when there's a vacancy, the precinct committeeman from that legislative district, and only the precinct committeeman, not the registered voters, just the precinct committeeman, get to select nominees to fill that vacancy. And then those nominees, there's three of them, are presented to the County Board of Supervisors, who by statute then select one of the three. Well, think about it. If conservatives have a majority of the precinct committeeman slots in that legislative district, they'll nominate three conservatives. And then, no matter who the Board of Supervisors selects, they will have replaced the prior legislator with a conservative. Now that is real political power.
Amen. That is real political power. And, you know, and how do you do that? You call in the Democratic Party. I mean, again, this is what happened in the Republican Party between 2009 and 2012. And it's how we ended up with a Republican Party that is controlled essentially by its far right. Well, frankly, I'd like to see the so-called far left, because, you know, I refer to us as the radical middle. I mean, you know, if you do public opinion polling and, you know, ask people, what do you want from your government, well over 50% of all Americans, including Republicans, want everybody to have health insurance at a very, very low cost or no cost. They want everybody to be able to go to college at no cost. And by the way, every other developed country in the world does both of those things. They want people to be able to have access to a union so that they can have, you know, decent pay and benefits, so that they can negotiate, so that they can have literally democracy in the workplace, which is what a union is. These are simple, straightforward things that are considered in the rest of the developed world normal. Conservatives support these things in the rest of the world. Remember when I did the show from Denmark and I had all these conservative legislators from the Danish parliament on, and I was saying, well, you're a conservative. You must want to do away with your national health care system. And they were like, what, are you crazy? So this is how you get inside the Democratic Party, by contacting your local Democratic Party and saying, I'm really interested in becoming a precinct committee person. How do I do that? In some cases, it's even a paid gig. Sometimes it's hard to get in. Most often, you can just volunteer and you're there. And then you're helping run the show.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We had a caller earlier who had said, you know, I voted for Jill Stein. What do I do? How do I influence the Democratic Party? Here's how you do it.
Today we're reading from David Blight's book, Frederick Douglass, Prophet of Freedom. This is from the introduction. In his speech at the dedication of the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., September 24, 2016, President Barack Obama delivered what he termed a, quote, clear-eyed view of a tragic and triumphant history of black Americans in the United States. He spoke of a history that is central to the larger American story, one that is both contradictory and extraordinary. He likened the African American experience to the infinite depths of Shakespeare and Scripture. The, quote, embrace of truth as best we can know it, said the president, is, quote, where real patriotism lies. Naming some of the major pivots of the country's past, Obama wrapped up his central theme in a remarkable sentence about the Civil War era. Quote, we've buttoned up our Union blues to join the fight for our freedom. We've railed against injustice for decade upon decade, a lifetime of struggle and progress and enlightenment that we see etched in Frederick Douglass's mighty leonine gaze, end quote. How Americans react to Douglass's gaze, indeed how we gaze back at his visage, and more important, how we read him, appropriate him, or engage his legacies, informs how we use our past to determine who we are. Douglass's life and writing emerged from nearly the full scope of the 19th century, representative of the best and the worst in the American spirit. Douglass constantly probed the ironies of America's contradictions over slavery and race. Few Americans use Shakespeare and the Bible to comprehend his story and that of his people as much as Douglass. And there may be no better example of an American radical patriot than the slave who became a lyrical prophet of freedom, natural rights, and human equality. Obama channeled Douglass in his dedication speech, knowingly or not. So do many people today. Born Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey, a slave, in Talbot County, Maryland, in February 1818, the future Frederick Douglass was the son of Harriet Bailey, one of 5 daughters of Betsy Bailey, and with some likelihood his mother's white owner. He saw his mother for the last time in 1825, though he hardly knew her. She died the following year. Douglass lived 20 years as a slave and nearly 9 years as a fugitive slave subject to recapture. From the 1840s to his death in 1895, he attained international fame as an abolitionist, editor, orator of almost unparalleled signature, and the author of 3 autobiographies that are classics of the genre. As a public man, he began his abolitionist career 2 decades before America would divide and fight a civil war over slavery that he openly welcomed. Douglass was born in a backwater of the slave society of the South, just as steamboats appeared in bays and on American rivers, and before the telegraph, the railroad, and the rotary press changed human mobility and consciousness. He died after the emergence of electric lights, the telephone, and the invention of the phonograph. The renewed orator and traveler loved and used most of these elements of modernity and technology. Douglass was the most photographed American of the 19th century, explained in this book, and especially by the intrepid research of 3 other scholars I write upon. Although it can never really be measured, he may also have been, along with Mark Twain, the most widely traveled American public figure of his century. By the 1890s, in sheer miles and countless number of speeches, He had few rivals as a lecturer in the golden age of oratory. It is likely that more Americans heard Frederick Douglass speak than any other public figure of his time. Indeed, to see or hear Douglass became a kind of wonder of the American world. He struggled as well with the pleasures and perils of fame as much as anyone else in his century, with the possible exceptions of General Ulysses S. Grant or P.T. Barnum. Douglass's dilemma with fame was a matter of decades, not merely of moments, and fraught with racism. The orator and writer lived to see and interpret black emancipation, to work actively for women's rights long before they were achieved, to realize the civil rights triumphs and tragedies of Reconstruction, and to witness and contribute to America's economic and international expansion in the Gilded Age. He lived to the age of lynching and Jim Crow laws, when America collapsed into retreat from the real victories and revolutions in race relations that he had helped to win. He played a pivotal role in America's second founding out of the apocalypse of the Civil War, and he very much wished to see himself as a founder and defender of the Second American Republic. In one lifetime of anti-slavery, literary, and political activism, Douglass was many things, and the set of apparent paradoxes makes his story so attractive to biographers, as well as to so many constituencies today. He was a radical thinker and a proponent of classic 19th century political liberalism. At different times, he hated and loved his country. He was a ferocious critic of the United States and all its hypocrisies, but also, after emancipation, became a government bureaucrat, a diplomat, and a voice for territorial expansion. He strongly believed in self-reliance and demanded an activist interventionist government at all levels to free slaves, defeat the Confederacy, and to protect black citizens against terror and discrimination. Douglass was a serious constitutional thinker, and few Americans have ever analyzed race with more poignancy and nuance than this mostly self-taught genius with words. He was a radical editor, writer, and activist. The book Frederick Douglass by David Blight. Our book for today is
Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. We try to have a lot of content over at ThomHartmann.com, and of course, every day my daily rant goes up at HartmannReport.com. No advertising, no fee or anything like that. You can even get it pushed out to your email box for free. But we also have, podcasts available that are free through wherever your favorite podcast provider may be, or the full 3-hour program. It's a 1-hour podcast, the one that's free out there. There's also the 3-hour podcast available at ThomHartmann.com. And we have a special video this week for supporters of the Thom Hartmann Program. It's over at ThomHartmann.com about the 62 worst members of the U.S. House of Representatives and Josh Hawley in the Senate. These are the people who voted against the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, which passed the Senate and the House overwhelmingly. But these 62 members of the House did what is just awful. You can check it out at ThomHartmann.com. Here, as they say. So let me pick up some of your phone calls. And Marcus in Alexandria, Virginia. Hey, Marcus, what's on your mind today?
Hey, what's up, Tom? Yeah, I'd like to talk today about something, a few aspects of what I call the package deal. Now, this is basically the New Deal on steroids, and it encompasses, at least in this discussion, the Medicare for All, the Green New Deal, infrastructure, and a living wage. So, and also abolishing private prisons. Now, specifically, what you can do in this case is you can abolish the private prisons, consolidate the prison space, and then you release all the nonviolent drug offenders from the records, legalize, tax and regulate all drugs, all that stuff. But you utilize those empty prisons, turn them into medical facilities, and you refit them to run on green energy. So what you do, everywhere there's one of those facilities, you bring in jobs from healthcare, from green energy, from infrastructure, and you basically get the whole country running just on that alone. The living wage, notwithstanding.
So you're suggesting this as a New Deal, Square Deal, the Great Society kind of packaging concept for these ideas. Yeah, I like that. It's a great idea with regard to turning. turning prisons into medical facilities, I'd say just tear them down and build a hospital there, you know?
Well, and the thing of it is, money has to circulate in an economy in order for an economy to grow. Accumulation makes it eventually collapse.
Yeah, no,
So,
I totally get it, and that's what's going on right now. Marcus, well said. Thank you very much. Sean in Stamford, Connecticut. Hey, Sean, what's on your mind?
Oh, hi, Tom. How are you?
Good. What's up?
Good. As someone who lives in a condo, I know exactly what you're talking about in terms of maintenance.
Yeah.
Because we just had our roof replaced here because we've had some major leaks, including my own unit. So we're getting that resolved. So I know we can talk about all that. Plus, there's something I want to add to that conversation, which is something called the 30-year cycle, which usually applies to commercial estate, but also can apply to residential, which is that after 30 years, that is often cheaper to replace a building than to rehab it. And I think that's what we're seeing in this building in Florida that you've been describing as porn, if you will, the word you used. Because I noticed the old buildings that are maintained last a lot longer, but when they're not maintained properly and you have low condo fees or whatever the case may be, this is the end result. Well, and that's my point. That's, you know, the developers sold them with low condo fees to make them easier to sell. The low condo fees did not create a reserve for major maintenance, and as a result, major maintenance got postponed in the case of this building for over 40 years. And yeah, lucky for me, I have the maintenance. Yeah, luckily we had you
had a reserve fund
in reserve for this. Yeah, we did.
That's good. That's a well-run condo association, and you know and I've lived in one of the. In fact, I live in one right now where there's a well-run homeowners association, and God bless them. But I have also lived. You know, the previous one that we lived in was a disaster. Again, because they just they would not reserve money. Sean, thank you. Spot on. Jennifer in Stillwater, Minnesota. Hey, Jennifer, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Yeah, I just wanted to correct something that you were saying with Dave in Federal Way, Washington.
Okay.
The Interior Department Inspector General for Joe Biden on June 10th issued a watchdog report that found that the National Park Police did not clear racial injustice protesters from Lafayette Park for Trump's visit to St. John's Church.
Yeah, I know.
And I posted.
And I strongly disagree with it, Jennifer. First of all, that Inspector General is still there from the Trump administration, and secondly, how can they say that when we saw it with our own eyes?
Well, because the report that I read the report, and it said that it was for a installation of a fence and that they had planned it many hours before.
Yeah, many hours before when Trump decides he wants to do a photo op and Bill Barr comes out and says, we're going to install a fence. I'm just not buying it, Jennifer. I get it that the Inspector General came out with that report, and there are still a lot of IGs and other people that Trump had put into place that are still in the federal government. But I'm not buying that report at all, at all. But thank you for correcting that, because you're absolutely right. That is what they said. Yeah.
Right. Can I say one other thing?
Sure.
About 2 months ago, I called in and I didn't have a chance to get on, and I was just going to say that when you were talking about that journalist that got pulled down on an airplane about 6 weeks ago, and that had never happened before.
In Belarus, as I recall.
Yeah. I had tried to call in and I never got on. Barack Obama pulled down the plane with the Bolivian president on it, looking for Edward Snowden in Austria, and he kept him on the ground. The presidential plane, and he kept him on the ground in Vienna for like 3 hours looking for Edward Snowden, who was a legitimate
the Russians were talking about that a lot. Neither one was the right thing to do, and two wrongs don't make a right. Jennifer, thanks for correcting the record. Alfredo in Mountain View, California. Hey, Alfredo, what's up?
Hey, hi, Tom. How are you?
Good.
Just quickly. I don't understand why is it that the government doesn't use PSAs or public service announcements to, deal with the people that don't want to get vaccinated, to inform and educate people about why they should be vaccinated. That baffles me. Can you talk? Do you know why is that?
Yeah, I'm willing to bet, Alfredo, you're more than 40 years old.
Yeah, I am.
Okay, and here's how I know that. Prior to Reagan blowing up the Fairness Doctrine, radio and television stations were required to do something called programming in the public interest. And that did not just include offering opposite points of view. That also included running public service announcements that benefited the local community, that served to advance the interests of the average person. And so, you had nonprofits like, the Red Cross used to provide PSAs and things to radio and television stations, and they had to carry them every day. So on every radio station, right up until the late 80s, you found these public service announcements, and the government frequently did them as well. Now it's mostly the Ad Council. There are still public service announcements, and you will very rarely, but occasionally, see them on television. The only reason you're seeing them on television now, though, when you do rarely see them, is because that's a slot that they couldn't sell an ad for. And rather than just give up that slot, they fill it with a public service announcement. It's a completely different dynamic. And so if the government was to produce a PSA saying, be sure to get vaccinated, you don't want to die, or we need vaccine passports so we can get our economy back together so people aren't afraid to go into restaurants and sporting events and things. If the government did a PSA like that and pushed it out to radio and TV stations all across the country, 99% of them would completely ignore it. And that's why they're not doing it. And that's how I know you're an older guy. Alfredo, I got to move along, but thanks a lot for the call. Eric in Seattle. Hey, Eric, what's up?
Hi, Tom. How are you?
I'm well. So far, so good. It's hot.
That's good. It is hot. I wanted to ask for some clarification, if you could, regarding the Democratic Party or people who would otherwise be in the Democratic Party to go into a third party. I mentioned, you mentioned several times the need for us to infiltrate the Democratic Party and then take it over that way, just like the Tea Party did, especially with the previous segment that you did on the video with the strategy that they used.
Right.
I just don't think that strategy would work with people.
It already is.
Different ideology.
It already is. You've got local Democratic parties all over the country that have been taken over by progressives. The one right here in Portland. Case in point.
Oh, good.
The Democratic equivalent of precinct committee person. I mean, sometimes they have different names and different titles, but no, this works, Eric, and it works in both political parties. In fact, it works in the Green Party for that matter. They have their version of this.
Okay, well, that's good news. I strayed off just a little bit from my initial question to you. I think it was after the insurrection of January 6th where a lot of the Republicans wanted to split off into their own party. And when you brought that up, and other media outlets also brought it up, but you spoke about it, I just never really heard the same advice to Republicans to also infiltrate or re-infiltrate the Republican Party.
Oh, they're working on it. This is Mitt Romney's thing, and he's not alone in this. And there are now 2 or 3 major super PACs that are working to try to, basically big corporations and billionaires like Mitt Romney who are trying to take back the Republican Party from the crazy right-wingers. The problem is that the crazy right-wingers are being funded by their own crazy right-wing billionaires. So it's a tough one, but they're working on it. Eric, thanks for the call. Mike in Spring Hill, Louisiana. Hey, Mike, what's up?
Tom, I just wanted to ask a question. We hear about taxing the rich more, but what we never hear about is the idea that when you tax the rich or corporations, they pass those taxes on to the consumer and raise the price of products. So how do you tax the rich without them doing that? Your premise is flawed, Mike. That is not what happens. If you look back at how the American economy was doing, say during the period from 1950 to 1981, a 30-year period when we had the strongest economic growth in the history of the United States, and we had reasonably low prices on pretty much everything. I mean, you could go to college. I went to college as briefly as I did. I went to a college and paid for it
working as a dishwasher in Bob's Big Boy and pumping gas and changing tires at the Esso station across the street on Trowbridge Road.
Been there, done that. Been there, done that.
Yeah, exactly. And what was the top personal income tax rate at that point in time? 74%. What was actually it was 91% at that point in time. It got dropped to actually that was the late 60s. By that time it was 74%. And what was the top corporate income tax rate at that time? It was almost 50%. So no, they don't pass it along. Corporations reduce their dividends to their shareholders, and billionaires just get less money for their money bins.
Oh, okay.
I mean, it's very straightforward. And again, the strongest time of American growth and the strongest time of the American economy and the strongest time for the American middle class were all when taxes were above 50% or close to 50% on both corporations and wealthy people at the top. These are all, progressive taxes. They're all graduated taxes. So corporations didn't start paying high tax rates and individuals didn't start paying high tax rates until they made just a pile of money. But it worked.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be back with more of your calls here on the Thom Hartmann Program, helping you win the water cooler wars. If you have a water cooler, we could use some cool water here. And welcome back. Let's see here. Frank in Santa Monica. Hey, Frank, thanks for watching us on the Thom Hartmann app. What's up?
Hi, what a privilege to be on. I'm a retired contractor. I've been involved in 3 condo associations as an owner. And my initial response when I saw that collapse was no HOA should be allowed to own a high-rise building.
I agree.
HOAs are just not capable of dealing with that degree of technicality without and not being political.
Which again, it goes to my point of it's time to regulate this industry.
In California, there's a pretty rigorous requirement to develop a 30-year reserve study.
Yes, there is.
And that would help.
And there's one in Florida too, by the way, but it's voluntary. The association can choose to, the developer can choose to do what's called deficit fund the reserve. In other words, not put anything into the reserve. Or they can fund the first year of payments into the reserve fund. But once they've sold the condos, they're off the hook. And then it becomes up to the condo owners whether or not they're going to fund their reserve. Now, I'm not sure in California, because I looked up Florida's laws yesterday. I'm not sure in California. I know that they're a lot more rigorous than Florida, but I'm not sure if they also require not just that the reserve fund be established, not just that a reserve fund, like the last condo we lived in, they had a reserve fund that was established. There was no money in it, but that it be funded. And that it be funded throughout the life, right from the get-go. So the HOA fees actually represent the long-term, the cost of long-term maintenance, which, in my experience, pretty much everyone I've ever known of, and the 3 that I've lived in, that was not the case.
Right. Well, here part of it is you have to fund it. But if I certainly wouldn't be in a high-rise condo, I wouldn't be in one in Florida.
Yeah. I have a feeling that property values in these condos in Florida, these 30, 40, 50-year-old condos in Florida are going to start going through the floor right now. And it's going to be a tough one. It's going to be a real tough one. And I hope they make it through. But Frank, when you were a contractor, were you building condos?
No, I was a residential remodeling contractor, primarily.
So, but you've lived in 3 condos. Did any of those 3? Did any of the condos that you've lived in? Did the homeowners associations actually consistently fund their reserve funds?
Yes.
That's impressive.
The one that I was on the board, a small one that I actually was the developer of it. Technically, so was involved in setting up the fund and stuff. We funded ours, but we had very minimal fees. We did not have a high rise,
right?
With the foundation being undermined by water.
Right. Yeah. And you probably weren't facing global warming, right in your face like these like these beachside high-rises are. Frank, thanks. You brought an important perspective to this. Thank you very much for the call, and it's very nice to hear from you. We will continue in just a few moments with more of your calls here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Speaking the truth, the multinational corporations and apparently the condo developers who really you didn't know all about. It's coming up on 9 minutes before the hour. Back with your calls in just a moment. Stick around. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. In addition to the free newsletter that we have over at thomhartmann.com, which gives you literally a link to every story or article I've talked about throughout the day, every day, comes into your email box every day. There's no charge. In addition to that, and my daily rants, which are free of advertising and free of charge over at hartmannreport.com, we also produce a weekly video. This week's video is about how power companies around the country, for-profit power companies 100% of the time, these power companies around the country are making it harder and harder and more expensive for people to install solar in their homes. All kinds of ways of trying to block people from doing this. And increasingly, they're getting support from Republican politicians, both at the local and the state level. It's something that we really need to know about, we need to be paying attention to, and we need to be aggressively pushing back on. You can check it out over at thomhartmann.com and at hartmannreport.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Nate, I'm going to have to ask you to pour another glass of water down my back here. During the next break, my shirt has all dried out, and I'm, getting really hot again. It's just incredible. It's just incredible. Anyhow, picking up your phone calls. Let's see here. Charles in Miami. Hey, Charles, what's on your mind?
Hey, how you doing, Tom? I like the beginning of the show. And first of all, I would be remiss if I forget to say again, I love Norma from Chicago. And
Norma's from Alabama.
I'm sorry, from Alabama. I'm sorry, Norma. But I love listening to your call. I mean, when you call in as well. And John from Minneapolis. I haven't heard him in a while. Yeah. But I had a revelation the other day because they were talking about one of the richest men in America, Bezos. And it started to, the gears in my head started spinning. I was like, wait a minute. He is not worth all of these billions. They can put all of that on paper if they want. But some of this is money that they denied people pay rates. Just like they denied giving out the proper health insurance to their workers. And they denied, they're paying their fair share of taxes as well. This is money, this money that you might as well consider it part of, our money as well. The mainstream America, because they've stolen that money. And they won't give it back.
Go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Charles.
Right, no. They've stolen that money and they refuse. It's not that they won't. They refuse to give it back. And, seeing what's happened with this condo is just making me think, are these wealthy condo owners, are they going to be looking for a government bailout? Because, of course, they don't want they don't want the Democrats to give a...
It's not the condo owners that I'm so concerned about, Charles, and I'm willing to bet that probably the majority of people who live in those condos were not, genuinely wealthy. They weren't people who had a net worth that was, over $1 million or even probably over a couple $100,000. There was a story, a kind of very sad story in the paper yesterday about one of the people who owned a condo in that condo association who, when they got hit with that $80,000 assessment to repair the pool area, and all the leaks and stuff down there, had to take out a loan. It's the developers who sell these condos because the developers write essentially what becomes the constitution for the condo. They write the rules, and they can put into the rules that the monthly fees have to be large enough to include long-term maintenance. So as time goes on, things get fixed. Otherwise, what you've got is basically the people who live in the condos for the first 10 or 20 years before real serious maintenance and expensive maintenance becomes necessary are getting a free ride, and the people who buy in at 20 and 30 years out, generally unsuspecting, don't realize that they're buying into a condo that, they're about to be hit with a $20,000, $50,000, in this case, $80,000 assessment. So, that's my point, Charles. So we should be talking about the developers. They're the billionaires, or they're very wealthy people.
And they're the ones that's getting away with skirting regulation. And last but not least, I wanted to call. I was trying to write to the White House this morning. I didn't get through, but I am glad that Biden is coming down here. And as far as the new infrastructure plan, we must not privatize anything, and they must not suspend the Davis-Bacon Act.
I'm with you. I'm absolutely with you. Charles, you are always so spot on these things. Thank you. We will be back. Let's see. Chuck Collins is going to be with us next, right? Yeah, Chuck Collins, the Institute for Policy Studies. This is going to be fascinating. Speaking of billionaires.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at CBDistillery.com, code TOM. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info is available at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. EasyFlow, personal air filtration system. Fresh air anywhere. More info at easyflowusa.com, code Tom. Masterclass with world-class instructors. More info at masterclass.com/Hartman. And Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Defying Hitler by Sebastian Haffner, a memoir. This is from chapter 17, about a little more than a third of the way into the book. At first, the revolution only gave the impression of being an historical event like any other, a matter for the press that might just possibly have some effect on the public mood. The Nazis celebrate January 30th as their day of revolution. They are wrong. There was no revolution on January 30th, 1933, just a change of government. Hitler became chancellor, by no means the Führer of the Nazi regime. The cabinet contained only 2 Nazis apart from him. He swore an oath of allegiance to the Weimar Constitution. The general opinion was that it was not the Nazis who had won, but the bourgeois parties of the right, who had captured, in quotes, the Nazis and held all the key positions in the government. In constitutional terms, events had taken a much more conventional, unrevolutionary course than most of what had happened during the previous 6 months. Outwardly also, the day had no revolutionary aspects, unless one considers a Nazi torchlight procession through Wilhelmstrasse or a minor gunfight in the suburbs that night as signs of a revolution. For most of us outsiders, the experience of January 30th, 1933 was that of reading the papers and the emotions we felt while we were doing so. The morning headline was, "Hitler called to president." That produced a certain nervous, impotent irritation. Hitler had been called to the president in August and November. He had been offered the vice-chancellorship and then the chancellorship. Both times he had set impossible conditions, and both times there had been solemn declarations, "Never again." Each time, "never again" had lasted exactly 3 months. Hitler's opponents in Germany at that time suffered from a compulsive urge to offer him everything he wanted, indefatigably, and at an even cheaper price, indeed to press it upon him. It's the same now with his opponents outside Germany. Again and again, this appeasement was formally renounced, and again it gaily reappeared at the crucial moment. Just so today. Then, as now, one's only hope was Hitler's own unreasonableness. Would it not sooner or later exhaust the patience of his opponents? Then, as now, it became apparent that their patience knew no bounds. At midday, the headline said, "Hitler makes impossible demands." We nodded, half reassured. It was only too credible. It would have gone against his nature to ask for less than too much. Perhaps the cup had once more passed from us. Hitler, the last defense against Hitler. At about 5 o'clock, the evening papers arrived. Cabinet of National Unity formed Hitler Reichschancellor. I don't know what the general reaction was. For about a minute, mine was completely correct. Icy horror. Certainly this had been a possibility for a long time. You had to reckon with it. Nevertheless, it was so bizarre, so incredible to read it now in black and white. Hitler Reichschancellor. For a moment, I physically sensed the man's odor of blood and filth, the nauseating approach of a man-eating animal, its foul, sharp claws in my face. Then I shook the sensation off, tried to smile, started to consider, and found many reasons for reassurance. That evening, I discussed the prospects of the new government with my father. We agreed it had a good chance of doing a lot of damage, but not much chance of surviving very long. A deeply reactionary government with Hitler as its mouthpiece. Apart from this, it did not really differ much from the two governments that had succeeded Brüning's. Even with the Nazis, it would not have a majority in the Reichstag. Of course, that could always be dissolved, but the government had a clear majority of the population against it, in particular the working class, which would probably go communist now that the Social Democrats had completely discredited themselves. One could prohibit the communists, but that would only make them more dangerous. In the meantime, the government would be likely to implement reactionary social and cultural measures with some anti-Semitic additions to please Hitler. That would not attract any of its opponents to its side. Foreign policy would probably be a matter of banging the table. There might be an attempt to rearm. That would automatically add the outside world to the 60% of the home population who were against the Hitler government. Besides, who were the people who had suddenly started voting Nazi in the last 3 years? Misguided ignoramuses for the most part, victims of propaganda, a fluctuating mass that would fall apart at the first disappointment. No, all things considered, this government was not a cause for alarm. The only question was what would come after it. It was possible that they would drive the country to civil war. The communists were capable of going on the attack before a prohibition against them came into force. The next day, this turned out to be the general opinion of the intelligent press. It is curious how plausible an argument it is, even today, when we know what came next. How could things turn out so completely different? Perhaps it was just because we were all so certain that they could not do so, and relied on that with far too much confidence. So we neglected to consider that it might, if worse came to worse, be necessary to prevent the disaster from happening. Through the whole of February 1933, everything that happened remained a matter for the press. In other words, it took place in an arena that would lose all reality for 99% of the population the moment there were no newspapers. Admittedly, enough occurred in that arena. The Reichstag was dissolved, then in a flagrant breach of the Constitution, Hindenburg also dissolved the Prussian regional parliament. There were fast and furious changes of personnel in the civil service. The book defined Hitler.
I know this is a little off topic, but we got an email from Daily Kos this morning that said the newest plan for the Republicans is to make Trump Speaker of the House and then impeach, of course, Biden and Harris, and that would install Trump as president.
What's going to happen? Oh, they're going to make Trump speak?
Yes.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Impeach Biden and Harris.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. On the line with us is Chuck Collins, a senior scholar at the Institute for Policy Studies, the director of the Institute for Policy Studies program on inequality and the common good, and the co-editor of inequality.org, a website you should be visiting on a regular basis. They've got a new book out, The Wealth Hoarders. The website ips-dc.org, and you can tweet Chuck at Chuck99TO1 or IPS_DC. Chuck, welcome back. It's been too long since we've talked. Tell us about your new book and what's going on in America with regard to the silver spoon wealth hoarders.
Hi, Tom. Thank you for having me back. And yeah, the new book is really looking at how the super wealthy hire planners, hire what we call the wealth defense industry to help them hide their money, hide their billions, hide their trillions. And it's very relevant right now because here we're having this debate about how are we going to raise the revenue, how are we going to raise taxes, and, you know, there's no, the IRS has lost its ability to tax the wealthy, find the wealth of the wealthy. And so, you know, it's very relevant to talk about how the super rich are hiding their money and building oligarchies. Yeah,
well, so 2 points. Number one, we didn't, you know, the IRS didn't lose that ability. The Republican budget, Republican budgets over a 40-year period have gutted IRS enforcement's ability by not paying for agents, right? I mean, isn't that the big piece of it?
Yeah, I mean, the IRS's capacity to follow the money, to follow the shell games of the super rich has been devastated with very intentionally, as you point out, by cuts to the Republican enforcement budget. You know, right. the Treasury Department's ability to enforce the laws.
So excuse me, I'm sorry, I thought you were finished.
Go for it. Yeah.
So how do we do this? How you know, I mean, we had this report that came out a couple of weeks ago, and I know you guys were all over it at IPS. You know, that you know, your average billionaire in America is paying what, between 1% and 3% in equivalent of federal income tax, if that. And you've got, you know, some of the, you know, about 10% of the Fortune 500 companies paid nothing in taxes. Many of them got billions of dollars back year after year after year. So, let's setting aside the corporations for a moment. How do these extraordinarily wealthy individuals do this? What are the tools and mechanisms that they use, and how do we challenge those in a way that is, you know, reasonable and fair that most Americans would agree with?
Yeah. What the super wealthy typically do is they hire their tax attorneys, accountants, their wealth managers, and those wealth managers use a bunch of tools. Trusts are among the favorite, what we call dynasty trusts that sequester money outside the reaches of taxes. Offshore shell companies, offshore tax havens, usually a combination of all these things. Anonymous shell companies, trusts, various transactions. And what the super rich do is they layer all these things together. So I hate to say it, but even the levels of inequality that we're seeing now, they're actually much worse because a lot of wealth isn't even showing up on the ledger. So we can enforce what you and I are talking about. We can enforce existing tax laws. We can shut down some of these tax shenanigans. We can outlaw certain kinds of trusts and transactions that the super wealthy use. We can require greater transparency, that corporations have to disclose who their real owners are. And then I think we can work across borders, starting with the UK, to have a global system of transparency. And all those things we're kind of on track to doing. You know, there's movement in this direction. That's the good news.
Yeah, and that's very good news. So just so you know, people, up to this point, our conversation has been kind of academic or theoretical. Let's just make this real for people. You talk about the 50 largest inherited wealth dynasties in America. What are we talking about? Who are we talking about? How much money are we talking about? And well, start with that.
Yeah. You know, a lot of attention has understandably been focused on the new wealth billionaires, if you will, the Jeff Bezos and the Elon Musks. But what's really important to understand is that there are families that are 3, 4 generations into wealth dynasties. They have been building wealth. The richest 50 families have $1.2 trillion of wealth together. And the Walton family has about $250 billion in wealth. So these are families that are not only not paying taxes, they are building wealth and power. They are building oligarchies. That's why we call them the silver spoon oligarchy.
And they're doing absolutely nothing productive. They're not running businesses. They're not building companies. They're sitting around the pool on their butts, cashing their dividend checks.
Yeah, and this is important. We might have some bond feelings for first-generation entrepreneurs who invent something useful or create a rocket ship like Elon Musk, but it's the second and third generation that are very focused on what I would call wealth defense. Yeah. Sort of protecting the money, putting it outside the reach of taxes, actually using their power to rig the rules to get more wealth and power.
Chuck, when you look at this, and actually, before I get to that, you co-authored a book. In fact, you were on this program talking about it. You co-authored a book with Bill Gates' dad, calling for an inheritance tax. Are there still, a substantial number of very, very wealthy people who think that this is obscene? I know I'm forgetting her first name, the Disney heir.
Abigail Disney.
Abigail, thank you. Has been very outspoken about this. Bill Gates' dad was. I'm not even sure if he's still around. But what does the landscape look like in terms of activism at that level?
I think it's interesting. I mean, there is the Patriotic Millionaires Network, several hundred super high net worth wealthy people who speak out for tax fairness. There are people like Abigail Disney. There are some billionaires who are stepping up and saying too much inequality is bad, the tax system should be fair. Not enough of them, but enough to sort of make this interesting. And it's important to point out not every billionaire wants to have a dynasty. Right. Chuck Feeney, who started, the duty-free shops, his perspective was, no, I don't want to create a dynasty of my grandchildren and great-grandchildren still having billions of dollars. He just gave it away in his lifetime. So these people are choosing to become dynasties.
Yeah, and it looks like Jeff Bezos' ex-wife is just basically giving away, large chunks of the money. I mean, how much do you need, right? You got a couple. Yeah. If you had $100 million should be enough to support not just you and your family, but your children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. But that's chump change compared to billions or tens of billions or hundreds of billions, which is absolutely mind-boggling. So. To the extent that we can collectively do something about this, what does the general political landscape look like? I know Democrats are talking about taxing the rich. Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, immediately come to mind with anybody if you raise this issue. But you also have a fair number of Democrats who are getting funding from some of these billionaires and some of these causes who are a lot more skeptical about this. And of course, the entire Republican Party, it appears, is opposed to this. Am I accurately characterizing the political landscape? And if so, or if not, what do we do?
Well, I think that is the political landscape. The one thing I would add is taxing the wealthy is extremely popular right now. So I'm part of groups that have been looking at the polling. It's interesting, when you propose the infrastructure bill, people are like, oh, ho-hum, yeah, I support that, 55%. When you say, let's have an infrastructure bill and make billionaires and global corporations pay for it, the support goes way up. Wow. So the one thing that's shifted in the last 10 years, Tom, is support for taxing the super rich has really gone up. And so now if politicians get out front of where the public is at, they will have support. And I think we will see, taxes on the wealthy go up as part of these negotiations. It's, the Republicans will do everything they can to block it, but at a certain point, where's the money going to come from?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's either raise taxes on the middle class or the wealthy chip in and pay their fair share.
Yeah, and Biden has said he will not raise taxes on anybody who makes less than $400,000 a year. And God bless him. I mean, this is, we're moving in the right direction. Chuck Collins, the new book is The Wealth Hoarders. You got to check it out. Chuck, thanks so much for dropping by.
Thanks, Tom, for having me.
Always great talking with you.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And the Institute for Policy Studies, I'm on their mailing list. They do just absolutely great work. Check them out on the web. You will be impressed. We'll be back. And welcome back. Yolanda in Spanaway, Washington. Hey, Yolanda, what's up?
Hi there, Tom. I was calling in regards to what happened in Florida, the building sinking.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the building sinking was built on a mitigated wetland. Okay.
So that used to be a swamp, and they filled it in, and then they built these buildings on top of it. That's what you're saying, right?
Correct. And the state of Florida and the state of Washington are the only two states in the United States of America that have this act called the Growth Management Act, which was written by the Master Builders Association. So it was all, I want to do what I want to do, and we're going to discard all the regular rules.
Wow.
This is what that Growth Management Act does. And then about the fees with the condos when they collect their fees, well, over here in Washington, we don't have condos. But what they do is they build the home, and then they don't collect the impact fee. You know, when you buy a new home, you have to pay your chunk into the neighborhood you're buying, basically, because that's a little bit goes to schools, a little bit goes to water. And
You're talking about homeowner association fees, essentially.
Well, yeah, but it isn't a homeowner's fee because you own your own home. It's a single fee that you pay. Everybody pays it when you buy your own home. But here in the state of Washington, because of the Growth Management Act, and they play with the rules, they don't collect those fees. So in my area where I live right now, they haven't collected those impact fees for over 25 years. Whoa. So we don't have roads. We still have drainage ditches, and it's just a destruction. The Growth Management Act is horrible. That's why that happened.
That's interesting. And it sounds, I mean, Growth Management Act, it sounds like we're going to get control of these developers. It's the exact opposite?
Yes, it was. That's why only two states in the union have, said, "Oh, we'll do that."
That's incredible.
So I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Crooked Florida, crooked Washington, and right now our executive, who's following these destruction rules in my community in Washington, is already got two felonious. He's got two suits against him for doing these kinds of things. So thank you, Tom. I wasn't involved in politics. You did it to me. I mean, I even tried to run in the wrong. I even had tried to run and started this thing, and I was in the wrong district. So I said, "Oops, sorry. No, I'll just support you."
God bless you. That's great.
But I'm trying to save my community. I mean, these people are destroying our earth, our sole source aquifer, putting things. This is why Florida is falling apart. I mean, we got to stop.
And meanwhile, Ron DeSantis is running his deregulation-a-thon and inviting developers to come in and tell him which regulations need to be cut.
Thank you. That's exactly what they do. And they're trying to do that here in Washington.
Yeah. Well, you've got a large right-wing contingent. I mean, people think of the Pacific Northwest as this liberal bastion. That may be true of a couple of cities like Portland, Salem, Seattle, Tacoma, but, the rest of both these states are bright red. Yolanda, I got to run, but say what?
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. It's great talking with you. I appreciate the call and the comments. It's 20 minutes past the hour. We will continue with your phone calls right after this. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. Speaking the truth, the multinationals and some of the real estate developers would really rather you didn't know all about. Stick around.
Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. We're trying to provide the very best content that we can for you at Hartmann Report and over at thomhartmann.com. And on Hartmann Report, every day, 6 days a week, I write an op-ed. Very often they're my rants, also for the radio and television program. And it's ad-free, commercial-free. It's free. You can sign up. It'll get pushed into your email box. Check it out at hartmannreport.com. And, of course, over at thomhartmann.com, we have our weekly video that we put up every week that does a deeper dive for people who are members of our program of thomhartmann.com. And the one this week is about this Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, SIGAR, their new report that almost 20 million Afghans are on the verge of starvation and nobody's talking about it. Check it out at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And let's see here. Stephen in Orlando, Florida. Hey, Stephen, you're on the air.
Hey, Tom. This is my first time calling, so I may be a little nervous.
Thank you for calling, Stephen.
I actually work in mortgage underwriting, and we do a lot of condos. And normally in Florida, the requirement is if we're lending, the borrower or the person who is buying or refinancing must do so at 75% loan to value, which means, just to break it down for those who don't understand, loan to value means basically what the loan amount is versus what your appraised value of your home comes in at. So if it's over 75%, we require that, and this is lender, this is from Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac.
So, Stephen, if I may, that's like a 25% down payment, essentially.
Essentially, yes, in Florida. Yeah. And Florida's the only one that has it.
Okay.
Florida's the only one that has it. The rest of the states are at 80%. Some states are at 90%.
Right.
So Florida is actually really strict on this, and this is coming from Fannie and Freddie, that requires a full condo review, and it requires us to see the budget, the reserves, everything like that. Now, of course, this doesn't help anything in terms of this building collapse, but if anyone buys a home at that condo, they would have had to provide a budget of some sort with adequate reserves. We'd have to see any litigation because, there's slips and falls. There's other things that can happen at a condo.
So how is it that condo just a few months ago imposed an $80,000 one-time assessment on all their residents?
I am not as hip on that as maybe other people. I don't understand why they would even do that kind of assessment. Right. I know that there's deferred maintenance assessments that can be charged, and I've seen them before, and normally they're done so on a monthly basis for over a period of 2 to 5 years.
Right.
But I've never seen a one-time hit where it's $80,000. I don't even think the company I work for, and I can't mention who they are, but as an underwriter, we wouldn't even accept that.
Wow.
We would say, no, absolutely not, because the risk is way too high.
So apparently there's some shady dealings going down in Florida. When I was looking this up yesterday afternoon, because I was thinking about writing a rant about it, and then I just said, I'll just talk about it on the air. But I was looking up these rules around the country, and every state seems to be different, number one. And number two, it looked to me like most of the states, including Florida, only started putting these kind of rules into place, requiring condos, when developers turn the condos over to owners, that either the developers kick in something for long-term reserves for maintenance, or they require that there be long-term reserves. That this is a relatively recent thing, like in the last 10 or 15 years.
Yes, and I've heard of what's called a lot reserve. And a lot reserve, what that is each one that you do, let's say, for example, you buy your home at $200,000, but then they're going to, as part of a new condo or a new home, you're doing a lot reserve of $10,000. So that will go towards the overall budget. But the HOA is supposed to have the overall budget. They're supposed to have a certain amount that goes for any private roads, master insurance policy requirements, things like that.
Yeah, no, I get
it.
So
they're supposed to have all that stuff in there.
Yeah.
And and that also, another thing that comes up is, of course, if it's under 75% in Florida, we don't require a full condo review. Therefore, no budget gets reviewed, and no reserves need to be accounted for.
Oh, so there's a loophole for people who can pay cash or pay a larger,
Right.
essentially, down payment.
This is all set by Fannie and Freddie. This isn't set by the state of Florida or any of the other individual states.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, Fannie and Freddie requires this.
Which again raises the question, how are these guys getting around it? I guess there must not be loans that are secured by Fannie or Freddie.
That's a possibility.
Yeah.
But I just know the loans that I work on, that I underwrite, are all secured by Fannie and Freddie.
Yeah, I get it. Stephen, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. It's a fascinating information. Allie in Chicago. Hey, Allie, we just have a minute to the break. You got a quick one?
I'll try and be quick.
Thank you.
Tom, I just wanted to warn people about this Delta variant. A friend of my mother's is a hairdresser, tiny salon. There's never more than 3 people in there. She wears a KN95 mask. Her client was wearing a KN95. The hairdresser is fully vaccinated with Pfizer, and she got the virus. And guess what else? It was Delta variant.
And were her symptoms severe or mild?
Very mild. She had like a headache for a couple of days, and that was it.
Yeah, that's the good news. That's why you want to get vaccinated.
Yes, and here in Illinois, our numbers are supposedly pretty good, but a lot of people who are vaccinated aren't getting tested, so there's no way to be sure how many break through. But yeah, it can happen, so people need to get their shot.
Amen. Allie, well said, and thank you for keeping it tight like that. I really appreciate it. Thanks so much for the call. It's great to hear from you, and thanks for listening to WCPT. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 27 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
More of your calls right after this brief break at the bottom of the hour.
Today we're reading from Behold America by Sarah Churchwell, The Entangled History of America First and the American Dream. This is from the prologue. On Monday, 30 May 1927, a cool day with showers forecast, New Yorkers were gathering for the annual Memorial Day parades around the city. It was only 9 years since the end of the European War, into which America had been so reluctantly drawn, and Europe had suddenly become closer than ever before. Precisely 10 days earlier, Charles Lindbergh had completed the first solo flight across the Atlantic in the spirit of St. Louis, and no one had yet stopped celebrating. Front pages around the country reported that Lucky Lindy had been mobbed in London, greeted by rapturous crowds of 150,000. Few Americans were talking about much else than the newest national hero, but in New York that day, different kinds of mobs were about to gather. Around 8 a.m., a group of Italian immigrants living in the Bronx set out for the elevated train on their way to Manhattan to join the parade. But they were not going to honor the American soldiers who had died in the service of their country. They were supporters of Mussolini, planning to join 400 American fascists who were marching in Manhattan's Memorial Day parade as part of the official fascist movement in the United States. They had been invited by the parade's organizers, to the outrage of many anti-fascists, including Italian nationalists and anarchists who threatened violence if the invitation wasn't rescinded. It wasn't. Like all his fellow fascists intending to march that day, Joseph Carisi was wearing the black shirt uniform, sporting leather boots, jodhpurs, a black cap, and carrying a steel-tipped riding crop. When he stopped to buy a newspaper, Carisi was jumped by 2 men, stabbed in the neck, and left to die on the sidewalk. Another fascist, Nicholas Amoroso, who was running either to catch up with his group or away from the killers, reports vary, was shot 4 times, once right through the heart. One of the 2 murdered men had served in the American Army during the Great War. The other with the Italian Army, papers reported. The parade they had meant to join took place without them, a fascist delegation of several hundred that was guarded by police to, quote, avert disorder. After the parade, the American blackshirts returned to their headquarters in the heart of Times Square. There, another of the fascists standing outside was set upon by 3 men. He defended himself with his riding crop as his fellow blackshirts charged out brandishing clubs and whips chasing the assailant through the theater traffic in Times Square, who fled as the black-shirted mob tore through the traffic. 100 fascists, reported the New York Times, rushed the attackers. A melee ensued that was quickly dispersed by the police. There was also violence in Brooklyn, where a parade of fascisti marched from the Angelo Rizza Fascista League at 274 Troutman Street in Bushwick. The LA Times reported several hundred men were parading, including 40 or 50 in the black shirt uniform. Fights broke out between supporters and protesters mingling on the sidewalks, and an anti-fascist was found lying on the ground, stabbed in the back. He survived and identified a fascist as his assailant. Accompanied by 30 police reserves to forestall violence, the marchers made their way through Brooklyn, stopping at the Wilson Avenue station, where the fascisti came to attention and gave the fascist salute. They ended at a Roman Catholic church, where the priest blessed them under large American and Italian flags, while the police remained on guard. The biggest outbreak of violence that Memorial Day, however, occurred in Queens, where it centered around a different right-wing group, not Italian Americans, but the self-proclaimed 100% American kind. By 1927, the Ku Klux Klan had spread across the United States since its rebirth in Georgia 12 years earlier. The first Klan was formed in the immediate aftermath of the Civil War, as former Confederate soldiers in Tennessee created a secret society to promote white supremacism, and terrorize the newly freed slaves in the South during the Reconstruction era. The name is generally believed to have originated from the Greek word for circle, kuklos, while Klan pays homage to the mystified Celtic heritage supposedly shared by white Southerners. Within a decade or two, the first Klan had been successfully suppressed by law enforcement and died out by the turn of the century. But in 1915, it was resuscitated in Georgia, and by the early 1920s, the second Klan had achieved a powerful political presence in the United States, not only in the South, but across the country. I would add this is because of 1915, the movie Birth of a Nation came out. The Klan had an active presence in New York City and Long Island by 1927, with favorite slogans, which they even attempted to copyright at various points. That year, the Klan was quote, calling attention to the fact that it first announced the program of 100% Americanism and of America First. They were not, in fact, the first to adopt these mottos, as this book will show. In 1927, both phrases had been around for a decade or more. But as far as the Klan busily copywriting hate was concerned, America First belonged to them. And on Memorial Day in Queens, 1,000 or so of them had gathered to march, many in white robes and hoods. They were accompanied by 400 women from the so-called Clavana, the feminine branch of the Klan. Some of the reported 20,000 spectators in Queens that day objected to the Klan's presence, as others defended their right to march. Scuffles broke out, and it turned into a riot. Women fought women, and spectators fought the policemen and the Klansmen as their desire dictated, said a newspaper. Klan banners were shredded, and 5 of their number were arrested, said initial reports, while a few others were caught up in the confusion as well. The book, Behold America, Sarah Churchwell.
Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Hey, we have a couple of special things over at ThomHartmann.com and HartmannReport.com. Of course, at HartmannReport.com, every single day, well, 6 days a week, Sunday accepted, I write a rant about an issue of the day that I think is important. Louise and I work on these together. We get them out typically around 6 in the morning Pacific time. And you'll find that at HartmannReport.com. It's free. You can sign up for it. There's no ads, whatever. But also over at ThomHartmann.com, we have a video every week for the supporters of our program. And the one this week is about how Wisconsin is trying to remove, in fact, they just got permission from their Supreme Court to remove 188,000 people from the voting rolls because they haven't voted in 4 years. This highlights the importance of getting to know who is your state representative, who is your state senator, and communicating with them regularly. It's all over at HartmannReport.com and ThomHartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And let me see here. Fred in LaPorte, Indiana. Hey, Fred, thanks for holding. Thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
I think what you're saying about condos, you could substitute the word infrastructure in there too.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. States build bridges and then they don't set aside money for maintenance. You're absolutely right.
Right. And that's what they got big fight in Congress. That's not why I called. You made a comment yesterday about unemployment insurance. And I've been thinking about that. And some of the fine things they like to say on the right.
Yeah, if I can, Fred, for people who don't know what you and I are talking about, yesterday I talked about a study that was just done in Missouri, where the governor, I think Greitens is his name, the governor and the state legislature decided to no longer pass along that $300 a week that the federal government is giving to people on unemployment. And so all of a sudden, $1,200 a month basically went out of the unemployment benefits of people who live in Missouri. And the consequence of that was supposed to be that people will start showing up at employers going, please hire me, I need a job, I'm running out of money, I'm hungry. And that's not what happened. And it's not what happened, I think, because the majority of people who are unemployed and not going back into the workforce right now are not going back into the workforce because they have kids. And they're concerned, they don't want to stick their kids in daycare because their kids aren't vaccinated and they're concerned about the virus. Or the job is just, such a low-wage job, it's like, why bother? But I really don't think it's that much. But anyhow, to Fred, you had a take on this. Pardon my rant. Go for it.
Our Republican governor of Indiana done the same thing. The $300 is not going to go to these people that are unemployed.
Right.
But I'm thinking that anybody would rather work for more than they can make on unemployment. So maybe some of these employers ought to think about giving these people raises, and they would get them back to work. I have been on unemployment before, and the first chance I got, I went right back to work.
And that's true of well over 90%, probably well over 95% of all people. They would rather work than just, loaf. And it's why you have so few people who actually retire when they hit 65. And it's like, hey, let's have some meaning in our lives. And so, work becomes social and everything else. But the Republicans have this bizarre notion that you have to starve people into work, into submission, essentially. And it's cruel and it's wrong.
And they want them to come back for poverty wages.
Yeah, exactly. And there's been no shortage of stories. I've seen a few national ones. We've seen several here in Portland, where employers that were paying. Well, actually, not. I haven't seen any in Portland. I should correct that, because we have one of the highest minimum wages in the country here now. But there have been several stories about stores that were paying $7, $8, $9, even $10 an hour, and they couldn't get people to come to work for them. I frankly think, Fred, a lot of Americans, after a year of kind of a long vacation, a pause, they're reconsidering their lifestyle. They may have downscaled their expenses dramatically. So maybe they were working at a job that was paying, $30,000 a year before, and they had calibrated their expenses to that. And then the pandemic hits and they lose their job, and so they move into a cheaper place, and now they're able to live on, $15,000. If you can imagine that, it's a very small amount of money, but still, they're living on it more modestly. And now they're saying, do I want to really go back to living on more money, or shall I just kind of hang out here? I think there's people are. This has caused kind of a reassessment for a lot of people. So I see it. Go ahead.
Years ago, I think you said your dad was a union man.
Yeah, a
union man all my life.
Union.
I raised my family by me working. The wife was able to stay at home.
Mm-hmm.
They just don't pay people enough right now. And a lot of the problems, I think, is because these kids are exposed to not a home life or all the time before they go to school. And if the one person, whether it's the man or the woman, could go out and make a decent living, or somebody could be home with their kids, I think a lot of our problems would be solved right there. But now both people got to work, and we got to find someone to take care of the kids, and that's not near as good as home.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with you, Fred. Although I don't want to lay a guilt trip on two income families, but the simple reality is that before Reagan came into office, the average household in America had 1.3, if I'm remembering right, workers. In other words, maybe every third house or fourth house had somebody working, the other spouse also working a job. And now it's over 2. So household income has remained basically the same since 1980, but the reason why is because individual income has actually dropped, and you've got people, going into the workforce to make up that difference. Fred, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Nicholas in San Cristobal, Mexico. Hey, Nicholas, what's up?
Tom, hi, how are you? Long time. I'm not sure this is completely in the vein of what you've been mostly discussing, but I think it's important. It's about so-called light cases of COVID. Mm-hmm. My dearest friend of 40 years died just yesterday.
Oh, my.
Yeah, really bad. However, she need not have died had doctors been on top of this light case situation. She had contracted COVID about 2-3 months ago, a very so-called light case, just a mild cough and a headache for a few days. She was quite old, nevertheless. She then contracted pneumonia about 2 weeks ago, and the antibiotics were not doing their job, so they had her x-rayed to find out her lungs had been completely destroyed by that so-called light case of pneumonia.
Oh, wow.
So the antibiotics were not able to do their job. The point of my call is to encourage everybody who has had a similar so-called light case of COVID to not take it for granted that they have gotten off scot-free. They may well not have. See your doctor and do whatever you can to correct whatever harm has been done to you before you end up like my dear friend, now dead and gone.
Amen. Amen. Nicholas, I'm sorry to hear about your friend, and well said. Thank you very much for that PSA, as it were. Thank you, Nicholas, and thanks for hanging out in our chat room and helping moderate it over on YouTube. Marie in New York City. Hey, Marie, what's up?
Hi there. Listen, I just want to say a little bit about infiltration of the Democratic Party.
Mm-hmm.
The Democrats have been infiltrated by the Republicans.
Oh, certainly in New York State.
And I know here in New York City that there was a whole little cabal of Republicans who registered as Democrats to sway the mayoral elections we are still trying to count.
Wow. Yeah, it doesn't surprise me. It doesn't surprise me at all. And you've got, Democrats in New York State, in your state legislature, who are indistinguishable from Republicans. And probably if Republicans were the people that were mostly voted into office in New York State, they'd still be Republicans. I get that. And that's why I think that we need to be, progressives, people who actually care about the fate and future of America and the American middle class, working people of all races and all types, need to be inside the Democratic Party and taking it back. Marie, thank you. Thank you for...
I just want to... There's just another thing I want to ask. Where is Tom Stiver, the billionaire who was so... Yes. Who was so gung-ho on running and just being this great progressive millionaire. The one millionaire millionaire that I can think of who really stuck to her guns about getting rid of her money was Mrs. Brooke Astor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mrs. Astor gave away all her money.
Yeah, I don't know about that, but I'll take your word for it, Marie. With regard to Tom Steyer, I think the important thing, and I discovered this when I wrote an op-ed saying, Tom Steyer, why don't you buy Clear Channel, when Clear Channel was for sale for $1.2 billion a couple of years ago.
Mm-hmm,
and I looked him up, and he's only barely worth $1 billion. So he's not, at the level of the Walton family.
That much money.
Yeah, but still, $1 billion is a lot of money.
And Mr. Bloomberg, him infiltrating the Democratic Party, I was very annoyed when they let him run as a Democrat.
Yeah, I totally get it. Marie, thank you. Thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you. We'll be right back. It's 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's talk media for the rest of us. I'll be back with more of your calls right after this. And welcome back. Terry in Ventura, California. Hey, Terry, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind?
Thank you, Tom, for what you do. Tom, I had a strong reaction to your rant as to our electoral system. We should vote green because it makes the Democratic Party more progressive.
I didn't mean to say that anybody should vote green to make the Democrats more progressive. My point was you need to infiltrate the Democratic Party and make the Democratic Party more progressive by being part of it.
Yeah, but Tom, okay, that's my reaction to it. I think that you didn't say that, but my reaction to it, some people believe by voting green we're making the Democratic Party more progressive. Hey, if we had a real democracy, or we'd have popular vote, and we'd control money so that we'd have real elections. But my comment, has it occurred to us that Senator Sinema started out as a green?
Right.
She's the one who's holding up the progressive agenda right now.
I know, and that's what makes me think that she has no core ideology other than me, like Roseanne Barr, who went from being a Green Party candidate for president to a Trump supporter, because that was what got her in the spotlight. And it's such a tragic thing, but I am convinced that this is. Some sort of a pathology that's being played out in public. It's very unfortunate. Terry, I got to move along, but thank you. Thank you for the call. Jeff in Portland. Hey, Jeff, what's on your mind?
Hey, good morning, Tom, and kudos to you and your staff for keeping the program running under such harsh conditions. Yesterday, our 116-degree day, Portland rose to number 3 on the list of major U.S. cities with all-time highs, behind only Phoenix and Las Vegas. Needless to say, we're very far north of those two. So get ready, America. Mad Max science fiction conditions may soon be coming to a town, your town. But Tom, in my opinion, just like the pandemic highlighted the dire need for Medicare for all, I think climate change induced extreme temperatures highlight the need for us to acknowledge housing as a human right. You mentioned at the top of the show our emergency rooms overflowing, and you can bet that many of those are people that are living on the streets in tents, no way to escape the brutal heat. And you wrote a report, the Hartmann report, earlier in the month, talking about a housing first policy. Other countries are doing it. Finland's doing it, just giving everyone a roof over their head, no questions asked, and they're saving 15,000 euros yearly per person in doing so.
Yep.
So Tom, here in Portland, there's a guy, Homer Williams. He's a retired developer, and he's become an advocate for unhoused people. He's proposed pop-up tiny home villages as a quick way to give people shelter. The only challenge I would think would be getting AC in those things. Do you know anything about that?
I don't, but air conditioning units are not as expensive as they used to be, relative to other things.
Especially in a small space like that, right?
Yeah, you wouldn't need a big air conditioner, and you just want to, insulate the building well. It doesn't seem like rocket science to me, Jeff.
Yeah, and we've got, I think, a lot of money going in the hopefully in the reconciliation package toward affordable housing, but that's going to take a while to get built. So in the interim, we have this extreme epidemic of houselessness on the West Coast in particular.
Yep.
And with these extreme conditions, it's just a humanitarian disaster. And this is, this is just the beginning of it.
Yeah, I'm with you. Jeff, thank you. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. Hey, we have a new video over at ThomHartmann.com. It's about this movement that has, it's being characterized in the media as being just, fringe wackadoodles, crazy people on YouTube, stuff like that, who are talking about how Democrats are torturing children to get the adrenochrome out of them, and Hillary Clinton is eating babies, and the ship in the Suez Canal, and how, and the really interesting one now, how if you get the vaccine for COVID that it will change your race. Yes, something that will make white people absolutely hysterical. The problem is this isn't just the Flat Earth Society. These aren't the people that we used to laugh at. This isn't just a few crazies on the edge. They just had a convention in Oklahoma, a serious convention where they were calling for Democrats to be put in front of a firing squad and shot. You need to check this out. It's over at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back, Sandra in Omaha, Nebraska. Hey, Sandra, what's up? Sandra? Oh, my. Sandra's been on hold for a while, Joyce, so I'm going to put her back on hold, so just in case she had to step away for a moment. Carol in Bridgeton, New Jersey. Hey, Carol, what's on your mind today?
Yes, I was calling with regard to what's happening here in Bridgeton, New Jersey, where we have a private wastewater facility, the Cumberland County Utilities Authority, and Bernhard Capital Partners from New Orleans has come in here, and they want to either privatize the facility either through a concession or a purchase or a combination of both. It's been really undercover with all of the utility authorities. 3 members of the board have been replaced so that they could get yes votes. The Cumberland County freeholders are acting like they didn't know about it. However, they met with this equity company back in February of 2020. And then all of a sudden on May 20th of 21, the board has a presentation from Bernard Private Equity Company, and they want to put through an award on June 17th. The public never had any knowledge of it, but yet all of these officials have been meeting.
June 17th was a week and a half ago. Is this a done deal now?
No, it's not a done deal because everybody got up in arms, and now they're extending it until August. But however, they're still going forward with this RFQ. These people are corporate raiders. Yep. They're doing a hostile takeover to monetize the assets of a wastewater facility.
Yeah, this is how Mitt Romney became a billionaire. It's obscene. It shouldn't be allowed.
And I think there's cooperation between Senator Sweeney here in New Jersey. He currently has a bill called RICH. It's the rich bill that he's trying to get through, which talks about monetizing these wastewater facilities. They're trying to say it's for broadband. We're such a poor county here. We're one of the poorest counties in South Jersey. People's jobs, they had some stability, and we're really up against it trying to put a hold on this. We're not getting a lot of support. We're not getting the freeholders are using COVID as the guise not to let us into public meetings. We've put up signs. We're trying to get a billboard. But we all know what happens when they privatize.
Yeah.
They're going to make money off the backs of the ratepayers.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the reason they do it. There's only one reason they do these kinds of things. So, Carol, is there a website or a Facebook page or anything that people can go to if they want to support your efforts?
We have a website on Facebook. It's called the Cumberland County Sewer Rate Watch.
Okay. A Cumberland County Sewer Rate Watch. Okay.
Watch.
Carol,
yeah.
I got to move.
And
go ahead.
Well, one more thing. We know that privatization fosters corruption.
Yes.
And we know that happens because people get bribes, and that's exactly what's happened here. And it's in plain sight. It's like watching what's transpired in this country the last 6 years on the federal level.
Yeah, that's so unfortunate. Carol, thank you. I'm sorry. I've got a time thing here, but I got to run. But thank you for the call, and thanks for sharing that with us. Sandra in Omaha, let's try it again.
Okay, I just wanted to let you know your extreme temps aren't that unusual. In June of 1981, my folks invited me and my 2 very young children out to Walla Walla, Washington to visit family. So we drove out there, and suddenly, the week we were there, the temperatures were in the 110, 114 range. No one had air conditioning. We went out to the beach, and standing in the water, we couldn't get back to where the grass was because the sand was so hot, and no one had sandals.
Right.
So there were some people that helped me carry my children because they were toddlers. They helped carry them over that hot sand because they were screaming it was so hot. And I thought, well, this could never happen again. So now that it's happening again, I'm thinking that once in 1,000 years event is happening this year, and then next year it's going to happen again and again and again. So we might as well get used to it.
Yeah, we have been pouring fossil fuels into the atmosphere for a mere 150 years. Right.
Yeah.
You go back before the Civil War. People used beeswax and heated with firewood, and we were starting to use coal around that time. But that's when we really started. So it's just 150, 170 years we have been doing this, and we have poured so much carbon and using the atmosphere as an open sewer. We have poured so much carbon into the air that it's just killing us. It is just absolutely killing us. And you're right. These are this should be a once in 1,000 year event, if that. And it shouldn't have lasted 3 days. And I'm very concerned. And I'm also very concerned that we had a terrible fire season here in Oregon last year. I don't know if it's hitting you in Nebraska yet. But I think that our trees are in shock right now, and I am very concerned about the fire season this year, particularly the forthcoming. I mean, they're talking about fireworks displays and things. Wow. Sandra, I got to run, but thank you for the call. Thank you for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow. Hopefully our building will get their air conditioning fixed today. And I won't have Nate pouring water down my back every hour on the break. And Sean had some frozen grapes. She had grapes in the freezer. That saved my life. It was just, thank you, Sean. Anyhow, we'll be back tomorrow. In the meantime, get out there, get active. Tag your F. There's so much we can do. Become a precinct committee person. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon. Be good to the people around you. Take good care of yourself.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
Here's a thought-provoking bumper sticker. The system is fixed.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info is available at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. EasyFlow, personal air filtration system. Fresh air anywhere. More info at easyflowusa.com, code Tom. Masterclass with world-class instructors. More info at masterclass.com/Hartman. And Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com.
We say fight back!
That said the newest plan for the Republicans is to make Trump Speaker of the House and then impeach, of course, Biden and Harris, and that would install Trump as president.
Wait a minute. Run that by me again, Diane. What's going to happen? Oh, they're going to make Trump Speaker.
Yes.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Impeach Biden and Harris.
Oh, and then the Speaker would lead the charge for the impeachment, right? There's a lot of ifs in there.
The Speaker is the third in line for presidency. So
correct. Oh yeah, that's right. So this is.
There was a congressman this weekend that said he wanted Biden to be a half-term president. So it all fits.
Oh geez, yeah. This is the latest QAnon thing. Diane, thank you for the call.